Say it louder, Ryan said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the entire restaurant. Tell them what you are without me. Ava froze, every eye in the room turning toward her as he stepped closer, smiling like this was entertainment, like she was part of the show, and then he dropped the ring onto the table between them with a cold, deliberate flick of his fingers. The sound was small, almost nothing, but in that moment it felt louder than everything else, louder than the murmurs, louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the quiet gasps spreading across the room. Go on, he added, leaning in just enough for her to feel the pressure of his presence without him even touching her. Tell them you have nothing. Ava's throat tightened, not from tears, not yet, but from the weight of what he was doing, from the realization that this was not private, this was not a mistake, this was planned, calculated, and meant to break her in front of everyone. A few people lifted their phones, subtle at first, then less subtle, as if they had been waiting for something worth recording, and now they had it. Ava noticed that. She noticed everything. The way the woman at the next table leaned forward, the way a man near the bar shook his head but did nothing, the way no one stepped in. Not one person. And then she saw him. Across the room, in the far corner, a man dressed entirely in black sat still, too still, his gaze fixed on her, not on Ryan, not on the crowd, but on her. He did not react, did not move, did not even blink in a way she could notice, and somehow that was worse. Why was he watching? Why was he not doing anything? Ryan laughed again, louder this time, feeding off the silence, off the audience, off the control he had. Look at you, he said, straightening his jacket as if he had just completed a performance. You thought you mattered. Ava's fingers curled slightly at her sides, not in anger, not yet, but in something deeper, something quieter, something that was beginning to form under the surface. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears, steady, controlled, almost detached, like her body was trying to protect her from the full weight of what was happening. Say it. Ryan pushed again, his voice dropping just enough to make it feel personal, even though the entire room was listening. Say you are nothing without me. Ava opened her mouth, then stopped, not because she agreed, not because she could not speak, but because something inside her refused to give him that moment. The silence stretched, thick, uncomfortable, and for the first time, Ryan's smile flickered, just slightly, just enough to show that he did not expect resistance. Not here, not now. A glass clinked somewhere in the background. Someone whispered, the tension tightening like a wire pulled too far, and still, Ava said nothing. She lowered her gaze, not in defeat, but in control, and reached for the ring, her hand steady despite everything, despite the eyes, despite the humiliation, despite him. She picked it up, looked at it for a brief second, then placed it back on the table, exactly where it had fallen. We are done, she said quietly, her voice calm, almost too calm, and that calmness shifted something in the room. Ryan's expression hardened, not because she shouted, not because she cried, but because she did not give him the reaction he wanted. You think walking away changes anything? He snapped, louder again, trying to pull the attention back, trying to regain control, but it was already slipping, just a little. Ava did not answer. She turned, slowly, deliberately, and began to walk toward the exit, each step measured, each breath controlled, but as she passed the tables, as the whispers followed her, as the weight of the moment pressed against her back, she felt it, the crack, the point where everything she had built around him, around this life, around this illusion, was breaking. And still she did not stop. Outside, the air hit colder than she expected, sharp, real, unforgiving, and for the first time, her composure wavered. She exhaled, a shaky breath escaping before she could stop it, her hand pressing lightly against her chest, as if that could hold everything together. Behind her, through the glass, she could still see the lights, the movement, the life that had just rejected her, and then, in the reflection, she saw him again. The man in black. He was no longer sitting. He was standing now, just inside the doorway, watching her, the same stillness, the same unreadable expression, as if this moment, her moment, was something he had been waiting for. Ava frowned slightly, confusion cutting through the fog of everything else, because this was not normal, this was not coincidence, and something about the way he looked at her made her feel like this was not the end of what just happened, it was only the beginning. The rain kept falling, steady and cold, soaking through Ava's coat as she stood there, trying to steady her breathing, trying to convince herself that walking away meant something, that it mattered. But the sound of the restaurant door opening behind her made her turn slightly, just enough to see shadows moving, just enough to feel the weight of eyes still on her even out here. A couple stepped outside, whispering, their voices low but not low enough. "That is her, right?" "The one from inside," the woman said, and the man nodded, already pulling out his phone, scrolling, searching, and then Ava heard it, the faint sound of a video playing, her voice, his voice, the moment already replaying like it belonged to everyone but her. She looked away, her jaw tightening, her chest rising and falling a little faster now, because this was not over, not even close. This was just the beginning of something she could not control. Across the street, headlights passed, reflections shifting in the wet pavement, but her attention pulled back again, almost against her will, to the man in black, still standing just inside the doorway, still watching, still not speaking. Why was he still there? Why was he not leaving like everyone else? Ava turned her body fully now, facing the street, trying to ignore him, trying to create distance. But the feeling did not go away, that quiet pressure, like something unseen was closing in, not physically, but strategically, like moves were being made, and she was only just starting to notice the pattern. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her hand, the screen lighting up with notifications, one after another, messages she had not asked for, names she recognized and names she did not, all pulling her back into the moment she wanted to escape. She hesitated, then looked down, her thumb hovering before she finally opened one. It was already there, the video, clear, sharp, edited just enough to make it even worse, even more humiliating, even more complete, as if someone had known exactly where to point the camera, exactly what to capture. The comments were worse. People she had never met judging her, defining her, reducing her to a single moment that they did not understand. She deserved it. Gold digger exposed. He upgraded. Ava's fingers tightened around the phone, not because the words were new, but because of how fast it happened, how organized it felt, how intentional. This was not just someone recording a random scene. This was something else. She scrolled further, her breathing slowing again, not from calm, but from focus, from the need to understand, to find something that made sense in all of this. Then she saw a name she knew. Not a friend, not anymore. Someone who used to sit across from her at lunch, someone who used to listen, someone who had known details that were now somehow part of the narrative being spread online. Ava blinked, once, then again, as the realization started to settle, slow but heavy. This was not just Ryan. This was bigger. She locked her phone, the screen going dark, her reflection staring back at her again. But this time it looked different, not broken, not yet, but alert, aware in a way she had not been before. Behind her, the door opened again, and this time, she did not need to turn to know who it was. She felt it. The presence. The same controlled stillness. The man in black stepped outside, the rain barely touching him as if it did not matter, as if none of this did. He stopped a few feet away, not too close, not too far, giving her space, but not leaving. Ava kept her eyes forward, her voice quiet but steady when she finally spoke. "Were you just going to watch that happen?" There was a pause, not awkward, not rushed, just deliberate, and then his voice came, low, calm, almost unsettling in how unaffected it sounded. "I needed to see how you would respond." Ava frowned slightly, turning her head just enough to look at him. Really look this time. And something about his answer did not sit right, not because it was rude, but because it felt like this had never been random, like this moment had been expected. "You needed to see," she repeated, the words slower now, more careful, because suddenly this was not about Ryan anymore, not entirely. The man's gaze did not shift, did not soften. "Yes," he said simply, as if that explained everything, as if she should already understand. Ava's mind moved quickly, connecting pieces she did not want to connect, the video angle, the speed it spread, the people who already knew what to say, and now him, standing here, saying he was watching on purpose. A chill ran through her, not from the rain, but from the possibility forming in the back of her mind, the one she was not ready to fully accept yet, because if it was true, then this was never just humiliation, It was something designed, something controlled, and she was right in the middle of it without knowing who was pulling the strings, until she noticed one small detail, the reflection of his watch catching the streetlight, revealing a symbol she had seen before, not in person, but somewhere online, tied to something far more powerful than she had ever been part of, and suddenly, her voice dropped just a little. Who are you really? Ava did not answer him right away, not because she was afraid, but because something inside her had already shifted, something sharp and restless that refused to stay quiet any longer. Her fingers tightened around her phone again, and this time she did not hesitate. She turned fully toward him, her eyes steady, her voice lower but carrying a different kind of weight now. If you already knew, then you let it happen. It was not a question. It was an accusation. The rain kept falling, soft but constant, and for a second, the world around them felt distant, like everything else had faded out except this moment, except the tension building between what she had just gone through and what she was beginning to understand. He did not deny it. That was the first thing that unsettled her. Not a defense, not an excuse, just silence, measured and controlled, as if her reaction was exactly what he expected. Ava's chest rose slowly, her breath steady again, but now it carried something else, something closer to anger, something that pushed her forward instead of holding her back. You think this is some kind of test? She continued, taking a small step closer before she even realized she was doing it, the distance between them shrinking, her instincts taking over before logic could catch up. You think you can just watch someone get torn apart and call it what? Observation. Her voice did not rise, but the intensity did, and for the first time, there was a crack in her control, not weakness, but fire. The man's gaze remained locked on hers, unreadable, calm, almost too calm, and that calmness made her frustration spike even more. Because it felt like he was not reacting to her. He was evaluating her. Ava exhaled sharply, turning away from him for a second, running a hand through her wet hair, trying to ground herself. But the feeling would not go away, that this was bigger than what just happened inside. Bigger than Ryan. Bigger than a public humiliation that should have ended at that door. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. The persistence pulled her attention back, and before she could stop herself, she unlocked it, her thumb moving faster now, driven by something urgent, something she could not fully name yet. The video had more views. Thousands more. Comments flooding in faster than she could read. But something else caught her eye this time. A new post. Not just a repost, not just a reaction. A headline. Clean. Sharp. Intentional. Rising executive exposed in public meltdown. Ava's stomach dropped, not from embarrassment this time, but from recognition. That wording, it was not random. It was crafted. She scrolled further, her heart starting to beat faster again, not chaotic, but focused, alert. Another post. Same angle. Same narrative. Different account. Then another. And another. This was not viral by chance. This was coordinated. Ava looked up sharply, her eyes snapping back to the man in black, her voice tighter now, more controlled. This is not just him, is it? He did not answer right away, and that silence felt heavier than anything he could have said. Ava took another step back, not retreating, but recalculating, her mind moving faster now, connecting details she had missed before, the camera angles, the timing, the speed of distribution, the way the story was already shaped before she even had a chance to react. You knew this would happen, she said quietly, more to herself than to him, but loud enough that he heard it. The realization settled in her chest, cold and sharp. She had not just been humiliated. She had been positioned. Ava's grip on her phone tightened again, and without thinking it through, without planning, she acted. She opened her own account, her fingers moving quickly, almost instinctively, and hit record. The camera flipped to her face, rain still falling around her, her expression raw but steady, and for a brief second, she hesitated. Then she spoke. You all saw what happened, she said, her voice clear, cutting through the noise in her head. But what you did not see is how fast this was pushed out, how quickly it turned into something else. She paused, her eyes flicking briefly toward the man behind her, then back to the camera. This was not random. The words hung there, heavier than she expected, and for a moment, it felt right, like she was taking control, like she was shifting the narrative back into her hands. She posted it. No second thought. No hesitation. Just action. The notification came faster than she expected. Not likes. Not comments. A warning. Her account restricted. Ava blinked, confused, then refreshed. The video gone. Removed. Her breath caught slightly, not from panic, but from the sudden realization that she had just stepped into something she did not understand. Slowly, she lowered the phone, her eyes lifting back to the man in black. And this time, there was no confusion in her expression, only a quiet, growing awareness that her reaction, her attempt to fight back, had just triggered something she could not undo. And for the first time, a single thought cut clearly through everything else. She should not have done that. The silence after her video disappeared felt heavier than the humiliation itself, heavier than the rain, heavier than everything she had just gone through. And Ava stood there for a second too long, staring at the blank screen like it might change if she refused to look away. It did not. Her account was still there, her name still visible, but the one thing she had just posted, the one thing that was supposed to push back, to reclaim even a small part of control, was gone without a trace, as if it had never existed. Ava swallowed slowly, her throat tightening, not from emotion alone, but from the realization that she was no longer just reacting, she was being managed. Behind her, she could feel him still standing there, the man in black, the one who had watched everything unfold without stepping in, the one who had said he needed to see how she would respond. And now, more than ever, she understood that he had not been observing the situation. He had been observing her. Ava turned slightly, her voice quieter now, but sharper, more precise. You knew that would happen. It was not anger this time. It was recognition, the kind that settles in slowly and refuses to leave. He did not move closer, did not step back, just remained where he was, the distance between them unchanged, controlled, intentional, like even space itself was something he calculated. I knew it was possible, he replied, his tone even, almost neutral, and that answer made something inside Ava tighten even more. Possible. Not certain. Not accidental. Just within range. Ava let out a small breath, shaking her head slightly, not in denial, but in disbelief at how easily he said it. How easily this entire situation seemed to exist within his understanding while she was only now beginning to see the edges of it. That is not normal, she said, her voice steady but lower now, almost to herself. Videos do not just disappear like that. Not for most people, he answered, and there it was, the line that separated everything, the invisible boundary that Ava had just crossed without knowing it existed. Not for most people. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind moving quickly again, trying to map out what that meant, who controlled it, how deep it went. But every answer only led to more questions, and none of them made her feel safer. Her phone buzzed again. But this time it was different, not a flood of messages, not random notifications, just one call, one name she recognized instantly. Emily. Ava hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered, lifting the phone to her ear as she turned slightly away, instinctively creating distance, even though she knew he could still hear every word. Ava. Emily's voice came through, tight, rushed, not warm, not supportive, something else entirely. What did you do? Ava blinked, thrown off by the tone, by the lack of concern, by the immediate accusation. What do you mean? She asked, her voice calm but guarded now, because something about this felt off, just like everything else. There was a pause on the other end, then Emily exhaled sharply. You should not have posted anything, she said quickly, almost urgently. You do not understand who you are dealing with. Ava's grip on the phone tightened, her eyes flicking briefly toward the man behind her, then back to the street, her thoughts aligning in a way that made her chest feel heavier, not lighter. Who am I dealing with? She asked, more direct now, more focused, because she was done being the last person to understand what was happening to her. Another pause, longer this time. And then, quieter, Emily said, just do not do anything else. Take it down, stay quiet, and wait. Ava's expression hardened slightly. Not from anger, but from something colder, something more controlled, because now it was clear. This was not advice. This was fear. Wait for what? Ava pressed, but the line went silent for a second, then disconnected. Ava lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen, the call already ended, the warning hanging in the air without explanation, without context, without any real choice attached to it. Stay quiet. Wait. For what? Ava looked up again, her gaze meeting his, and this time there was no hesitation, no confusion, just a quiet, growing awareness of how far out of her depth she really was. You are part of this, she said, not accusing, not questioning, just stating what had become obvious. He did not confirm it. He did not deny it. But something in his stillness, in the way he held her gaze without blinking, without shifting, told her enough. Ava's shoulders lowered slightly, not in surrender, but in recognition, the kind that comes when you realize the rules are not just different, they are entirely hidden. The rain softened, the street quieter now, but inside her, everything felt louder, sharper, more exposed, and for the first time since this started, Ava felt it fully. The gap, the distance between what she could control and what she could not, between her world and whatever system he belonged to. And no matter how steady her voice stayed, no matter how straight she stood, one truth settled in deeper than anything else. She was already in something she did not have the power to stop. Ava did not speak right away, not because she had nothing to say, but because for the first time, she understood that every word she chose now mattered more than anything she had said before. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the weight pressing on her chest had not lifted. If anything, it had settled deeper, sharper, more defined, like something inside her had finally stopped resisting what this really was. Not a mistake. Not a moment. Not just Ryan. She looked down at her phone again, the screen still dim, her reflection faint but visible, and for a brief second she saw the version of herself from earlier, the one standing in that restaurant, caught off guard, exposed, reacting. That version felt distant now. Not gone, but no longer in control. Ava exhaled slowly, her breath steady, deliberate, as if she was forcing her body to align with the clarity forming in her mind. So this is how it works, she said quietly, not to him, not entirely, but to the situation itself, to the invisible structure she could now feel around her. Silence answered back, but it was not empty. It was filled with understanding. Ava lifted her head again, her eyes sharper now, not searching, not confused, but focused in a way that surprised even her. You control what people see, she continued, her voice gaining strength, not louder, but more certain. What they believe, how fast it spreads, and how fast it disappears. She paused, her gaze locking onto his, not intimidated, not retreating, just measuring, the same way she realized he had been measuring her. And you expected me to stay quiet. It was not a question. It was a conclusion. The man in black did not move, but something in his expression shifted, subtle, almost invisible, like the smallest acknowledgement that she had reached a line most people never saw. Ava felt it. Not approval, not support, just recognition. And for some reason, that mattered more than anything he could have said. Ava looked away first, not out of weakness, but because she had seen enough, understood enough to know that standing here, waiting for answers from him, was not going to change anything. This was not his fight. It was hers. Her phone buzzed again, softer this time, almost hesitant, and she unlocked it slowly, not reacting, not rushing. The comments were still there. The narrative still spreading. But now she saw it differently. Patterns. Repetition. Accounts that looked different but spoke the same way. This was not chaos. This was structure. Ava's fingers hovered over the screen, then lowered, her grip loosening slightly as a new thought settled in, quieter but stronger than the panic from before. If they could control the story, then the story was the battlefield. She let that sit for a moment, her heartbeat steady now, not racing, not collapsing, just present. You said you needed to see how I would respond, she said after a beat, her voice calm again, but no longer uncertain. Now you have. She turned slightly toward him, not fully, just enough to make it clear she was not avoiding him anymore. And I am still here. Another pause. This one different. Not filled with confusion. Filled with choice. Ava glanced once more at the restaurant behind her, at the glass doors, at the life she had just walked out of, and something inside her settled into place, not as a feeling, but as a decision. She could leave. She could stay quiet. She could disappear the way they expected her to. But that would not erase what happened. It would only confirm it. Ava straightened slightly, her shoulders aligning, her posture shifting in a way that was small from the outside, but undeniable from within. She was still exposed, still outmatched, still without power in a system she did not fully understand. But she was no longer unaware. And that changed everything. She looked back at him one last time, not for guidance, not for permission, but as if marking the moment, anchoring it, understanding that whatever came next, this was where it began. "I do not need you to fix this," she said quietly, each word measured, intentional, "but I am not going to pretend it did not happen." Her voice did not shake. Not this time. The air between them felt different now, not lighter, not easier, but clearer, like something unspoken had been acknowledged without needing to be explained. Ava turned away, finally, completely, her steps slow at first, then more certain as she moved down the sidewalk, the city stretching out in front of her, unfamiliar now, not because it had changed, but because she had. Every step forward carried risk. She knew that. Every move she made would be seen, measured, possibly controlled. She knew that too. But stopping was no longer an option. Not after this. Not after realizing how deep it went. Ava's phone buzzed again in her hand, and this time she did not look at it right away. She kept walking, her eyes forward, her expression steady, because for the first time since everything began, she was not reacting to what was happening to her. She was choosing what to do next, and even though she did not know how, even though she did not have the power yet, one truth had already locked in a place inside her, clear and unshakable. She was not going to stay silent. She was going to fight it. Ava did not slow down, but she stopped reacting. That was the first change. The city moved around her, headlights cutting through the wet streets, conversations blending into noise, people passing without noticing her. And for the first time since everything started, she began to notice them back. Not who they were, but how they moved, how they responded, how quickly attention shifted from one thing to another, how easily narratives replaced each other. She replayed everything in her mind, not emotionally this time, but structurally. The timing of the video, the speed of the spread, the immediate framing of the story, the way her attempt to respond was erased almost instantly. That was not random. That was controlled flow. Ava slowed her steps just slightly, her breathing steady, her mind sharper now, breaking things down piece by piece. Information was not just shared. It was placed, amplified, suppressed, and more importantly, it followed patterns. She pulled her phone up again, not to react, not to scroll endlessly, but to observe. She searched her own name, not out of panic, but with intent, watching the results carefully, comparing headlines, noting which posts stayed at the top, which disappeared, which accounts pushed the same angle, the same phrasing, the same tone. It was coordinated, but not perfectly. That was the first crack. Small, almost invisible, but it was there. Ava stopped near a corner, standing under the edge of a building to avoid the rain, her eyes scanning the screen with quiet focus. If the system controlled visibility, then it also had limits. It could not control everything at once. It prioritized. It filtered. And filters could be tested. Ava lowered her phone slightly, her fingers tapping once against the side, a habit she did not realize she had, but now it marked something different, a shift from reacting to thinking. "Show me your edges," she murmured under her breath, not expecting an answer, but setting an intention. She opened a different account, one she had not used in months, one not directly tied to her public identity, and paused for a second, considering what to do next. Not a full response, not a direct defense, something smaller, something subtle. Ava searched for one of the viral clips again, the one gaining traction fastest, and instead of engaging with it directly, she chose a comment thread, one that was already active, already drawing attention. She read through the responses, watching how people reacted, how they agreed, how they repeated what they saw without questioning it. Then she typed, not emotional, not defensive, just a question. "Does anyone else find it strange how fast this video was edited and posted from multiple angles?" She read it once, then again, making sure it did not sound like her, making sure it blended in, then posted it without hesitation. For a moment, nothing happened. The comment sat there, quiet, unnoticed, just another line in a long chain of noise. Ava waited, her eyes steady, her breathing calm, not expecting immediate results, Because this was not about reaction, it was about observation. 10 seconds. 20. Then a reply. What do you mean? Ava did not smile, but something in her expression shifted slightly, a small spark, controlled, contained. She did not rush to answer. She waited again, letting the thread build, letting curiosity do the work for her. Another reply. Yeah, actually, that is weird. Ava exhaled slowly, her fingers moving again, adding just enough. Most people do not film like that in real time. Feels prepped. She stopped there. No more. No pushing. Just planting. The responses began to shift, slowly at first, then a little faster, not overwhelming, not dominant, but present, enough to create a second layer of conversation, a small fracture in the narrative that had seemed so solid just minutes ago. Ava watched closely, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tracked the thread, noting which replies stayed visible, which disappeared, which accounts engaged, and which stayed silent. And then she saw it. One of her comments flickered for a second, then dropped lower, pushed down by a sudden surge of new replies that echoed the original narrative, almost identical in tone, almost synchronized. Ava's lips pressed together slightly, not in frustration, but in confirmation. There it was. Correction behavior. The system responding. Adjusting. Not instantly removing her, not yet, but countering her influence, redirecting attention, smoothing out the disruption she introduced. Ava lowered her phone slowly, her gaze lifting from the screen to the street ahead, her mind already moving faster than before. That was enough. She did not need more. Not right now. Because the test worked. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But enough to prove one thing that mattered more than anything else in that moment. The system could be touched. And for the first time since everything began, Ava felt it clearly. Not power, not control, but something just as important, leverage beginning to form where there had been none before. Ava did not move right away, but she felt it, the shift, subtle but undeniable, like the air around her had changed direction. It was not visible, not obvious, but it was there. The moment her comment disrupted the pattern, even slightly, something had noticed. She did not need confirmation. She could feel it in the way the thread reacted, in how quickly the narrative corrected itself, in how her small interference had triggered a response that was too precise to be random. Ava lowered her phone slowly, her fingers still, her mind already adjusting, recalibrating. This was no longer just observation. This was interaction. And interaction meant exposure. She stepped away from the corner, back into the open sidewalk, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, stretching out in distorted lines beneath her feet, and for a moment, everything looked normal again. People walked past. Cars moved. Conversations resumed. But Ava knew better now. Normal was surface. Underneath it, something else was always moving. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was not a flood, not noise, just one notification. A message request. No name she recognized. No profile picture. Just a blank identifier. Ava hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen, her instincts pulling in two directions at once. Ignore it. Open it. She exhaled slowly, then tapped. The message was short. Too short. You are not blending in as well as you think. Ava's eyes did not widen. She did not flinch. But something inside her tightened, precise, controlled, like a switch had been flipped. This was not random. This was not a troll. This was direct. She read it again, slower this time, letting each word settle, letting the tone reveal itself. Not emotional. Not aggressive. Observational. The same way he had watched her. Ava's gaze lifted from the screen, her eyes scanning the street instinctively, not looking for danger, but for presence, for patterns, for anything that felt out of place, but everything looked the same. That was the point. Whoever sent that message did not need to stand out. They were already inside the system she had just touched. Ava lowered her phone slightly, her breathing steady, her thoughts aligning faster now. This was attention. Not the kind she had before, not public, not loud, but targeted, focused, controlled. And that made it more dangerous. She did not reply. Not yet. Instead, she reopened the thread where she had posted earlier, her eyes moving quickly, analyzing the flow again, but this time with a different awareness. The responses had stabilized. The disruption she created was still there, but reduced, diluted, contained. And yet, not erased. That mattered. Ava tilted her head slightly, her lips pressing together for a brief second as a new realization formed, sharper than the last. They saw her, but they had not stopped her. Not completely, which meant one of two things. Either she was not a threat yet, or they were watching to see what she would do next. Ava's grip on the phone adjusted, her posture shifting slightly as she leaned into that thought, not resisting it, not fearing it, but accepting it as part of the reality she had stepped into. The man in black had said he needed to see how she would respond. Now it was not just him. Ava turned her head slightly, her gaze drifting toward the restaurant again, the glass reflecting the city lights, but he was no longer standing there. He had moved. She did not know where. And somehow, that felt more significant than if he had stayed. Because now, the observation was no longer visible. It was everywhere. Ava looked back at her phone, at the message, her thumb hovering again, but this time not out of hesitation, out of calculation. If they were watching, then every move she made was information. Every response was data. Ava's lips parted slightly as she let out a slow breath, her voice barely above a whisper, more to herself than anyone else, then watch. It was not defiance. Not loud. Not reckless. Just a quiet acknowledgement that she understood the game had changed. Her fingers moved again, but instead of replying directly, she opened a different app, something unrelated, something normal, her actions deliberate, controlled, designed to blend, to shift the pattern back, to create noise where there had been signal. She was not running. She was adjusting, learning, testing again, but differently this time. Ava slipped her phone into her pocket, her steps resuming, steady, unhurried, her eyes forward, but her awareness expanded now, not just seeing what was in front of her, but sensing what might be behind it. She could feel it, that thin line she was walking, between being ignored and being flagged, between blending in and standing out. And for the first time, she understood that the most dangerous place was not being seen, it was being noticed. Ava's jaw tightened slightly, not from fear, but from focus, because now she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer invisible inside their system. And the fact that they had not shut her down completely meant they were waiting to see just how far she would go. Ava kept walking, but slower now, not because she was tired, but because her mind was no longer chasing answers. It was waiting for them to reveal themselves. The city felt different again, not louder, not quieter, just layered, like every normal interaction had something underneath it she could not see before, and now she could not unsee it. Her phone stayed in her pocket, but she could feel its weight, like it was no longer just a device. It was a connection point, a thread tied into something much larger than her. She turned onto a quieter street, away from the main traffic, where the noise softened and her thoughts could settle just enough to catch up with everything that had happened. The humiliation, the speed of the video, the comments, the removal, the message, the silence. None of it stood alone anymore. It connected. Ava stopped near a dimly lit storefront, her reflection faint in the glass, distorted by the remaining drops of rain. And for a moment, she just looked at herself, really looked, not as the woman who had been humiliated, but as someone who had been placed. That word came to her without effort. Placed. Not chosen. Not random. Positioned. Ava's brow furrowed slightly as she let that thought settle deeper, because if she had been positioned, then so had everything else. Ryan. The setting. The timing. Even the audience. Her chest tightened again, but this time it was not from pain. It was from clarity. A memory surfaced, small, almost forgettable at the time, but now it felt different. Earlier that day, before everything happened, Ryan had been unusually calm, almost rehearsed, like he was waiting for something, not reacting to it. And the reservation, it had not been her choice. He had insisted on that place. That time. That table. Ava's breath slowed, her eyes narrowing slightly as the pieces aligned in a way she could not ignore anymore. This was not just a breakup that went too far. It was a moment that had been shaped. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone again, her fingers moving quickly now, not impulsively, but with purpose. She searched the restaurant, not for reviews, not for menus, but for ownership, connections, anything that tied it to something larger. The results loaded, and for a second, everything looked normal. A high-end place, good ratings, popular among business clients. But then she saw it. A name, not the restaurant itself, but the holding group behind it. Ava's eyes fixed on it, her mind racing as she recognized it. Not personally, but from somewhere else, somewhere recent, something she had seen in passing without realizing it mattered. The symbol on the man's watch. It matched. Not exactly, not obvious, but close enough that her instincts reacted before her logic fully processed it. Ava exhaled slowly, her grip tightening slightly around the phone as a deeper realization settled in, colder than anything before. The place where she had been humiliated was not neutral ground. It belonged, or at least connected, to the same network as him. Her pulse picked up, not chaotic, but sharp, focused, because this changed everything. It meant that moment inside was not just observed. It was contained, controlled from the environment itself. Ava's gaze lifted from the screen, her eyes scanning the street again. But this time, she was not looking for people. She was looking for structure. Cameras. Angles. Entry points. Things she would have ignored before. And suddenly, they were everywhere. Subtle. Blended. But present. She swallowed. Slowly, her thoughts tightening into something more defined. Something closer to anger now. Not explosive, but controlled, directed. I was never supposed to win that moment, she whispered, the words barely audible, but heavy with meaning, because now she understood why everything had moved so quickly against her. Because it was designed to. Ava's fingers moved again, scrolling deeper, searching the holding group, its subsidiaries, its connections, and the more she saw, the more the edges of something larger came into view, not fully clear, not fully exposed, but enough to feel its size. This was not just about controlling one video. It was about controlling perception, narratives, outcomes, people, and she had been one of them. A pawn. The word hit harder than she expected, not because it was new, but because it was accurate. Ava closed her eyes for a brief second, her breathing steady but heavier now, letting the weight of that settle fully before she opened them again, sharper, clearer, more resolved than before. The pain was still there. The humiliation had not disappeared, but now it had direction, purpose. She was not just hurt. She was aware, and that made her dangerous in a way she had not been before. Ava slipped her phone back into her pocket, her posture straightening slightly as she stepped away from the glass, her reflection fading behind her as she moved forward again, not faster, not slower, but with intention now, each step grounded in something deeper than reaction. She did not know the full system yet. She did not know all the players, but she knew enough. Enough to understand that what happened to her was not isolated. Enough to know that if she was placed once, it could happen again. Ava's jaw tightened slightly, her gaze fixed ahead as the city stretched out in front of her, no longer familiar, no longer safe, but no longer invisible either. And as the pieces continued to form in her mind, one thought rose above the rest, quiet but undeniable. If they could design one moment this precisely, then she had only seen a fraction of what they were really capable of. Ava did not rush the next step, and that was exactly why it worked. She kept walking, her pace steady, her expression neutral, but inside, every detail she had just uncovered was aligning into something usable, something actionable, something that could shift even a fraction of control back into her hands. The restaurant was not random. The ownership was not random. The distribution of the video was not random. That meant one thing that mattered more than anything else right now. There were layers. And layers meant blind spots. Ava reached into her pocket again, pulling out her phone, but this time she did not go back to the obvious channels, not the viral posts, not the trending clips, not the loud spaces where everything was already being controlled. She went smaller, quieter. She searched for the holding group again, not the public face, but the secondary pages, the forgotten mentions, the business filings, the connections that most people would scroll past because they did not seem important. Ava slowed her steps again, stopping near a parked car, its dark window reflecting her silhouette as she leaned slightly closer to her screen. There it was. A subsidiary. Then another. Then a third. The names shifted, but the structure stayed consistent. Layered ownership, overlapping boards, repeated individuals appearing across different entities under slightly different titles. Ava's eyes sharpened as she traced one name in particular, not because it stood out, but because it appeared just enough times to matter without drawing attention. Not the man in black. Someone else. Lower profile. Operational. Ava clicked deeper, her fingers moving faster now, but still controlled, still deliberate, not chasing, but following a pattern she was beginning to understand. Information here was not hidden. It was buried in plain sight. And then she found it. A scheduled event. Private. Not publicly promoted, but listed just enough to exist for those who knew where to look. Same holding group. Same network. Different location. Ava's breath slowed slightly, her mind locking onto the possibility forming in front of her. If the restaurant was controlled space, then this event would be too, which meant the same system would be active. The same patterns. The same vulnerabilities. Ava did not smile, but something in her posture shifted again, a quiet alignment between thought and action, because now she had something more than awareness. She had a point of entry. It was small, fragile, and dangerous. She knew that. One wrong move, one visible pattern, and whatever protection her anonymity still held would disappear instantly. But doing nothing was no longer an option. Ava stepped away from the car, her reflection sliding off the glass as she moved, her phone still in her hand, her thumb hovering for just a second before she opened a new draft. Not a post, not public, just a note. She typed carefully, mapping out what she knew, not emotionally, not as a victim, but as a strategist, outlining the connections, the names, the locations, the behavior patterns she had observed. This was no longer about proving she was right. It was about understanding how to move without being seen. Ava paused, her eyes scanning what she had written, then added one more line, the most important one. Test presence without identity. She read it once, then locked her phone, the screen going dark again, her reflection returning, but this time it looked different. Not lost, not reactive, focused. Ava looked up, her gaze steady as she stepped back onto the main sidewalk, the city opening up in front of her again. But now it felt less like chaos and more like a system she was beginning to read. Her next move had to be small, invisible. She could not challenge them directly. Not yet, but she could observe from inside. Ava adjusted her path slightly, heading toward a nearby cafe, one that stayed open late, one that blended into the city's background noise, and as she stepped inside, the warmth hit her instantly, the quiet hum of conversation wrapping around her like nothing had changed. But everything had. She chose a seat near the window, not too exposed, not too hidden, her phone resting on the table as she opened it again, this time logging into another dormant account, one with minimal activity, no clear identity, no connection to her main profile. She paused for a second, her fingers still, then began to search for that event again, but from this new perspective, watching how it appeared, who engaged with it, which accounts interacted with the network surrounding it. And then she did something small, almost invisible. She followed one of the secondary profiles connected to the event, not directly, not aggressively, just a quiet action that would place her inside the edge of that system's awareness. Ava leaned back slightly, her eyes fixed on the screen, waiting, not expecting immediate feedback, not expecting anything obvious, because she understood now. This system did not react loudly. It adjusted. Slowly. Precisely. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. Nothing. Ava exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction, not from comfort, but from confirmation. She was still beneath the threshold. Still unseen. That was her advantage. For now. Her phone buzzed once, soft, almost unnoticeable, and Ava's eyes dropped instantly to the screen, her focus sharpening again, because this time, it was not a random notification. It was a profile view alert. From the same account she had just followed. Ava did not move for a second, her fingers still, her breathing controlled, because that should not have happened this fast. Not unless they were already watching more closely than she thought, and as the notification faded, one realization settled in with quiet precision. She had just made her first move, and something on the other side had already noticed. The notification did not disappear this time. It stayed there, quiet but heavy, like a signal that had already been received and processed somewhere beyond her reach. Ava did not touch her phone for a few seconds, her fingers resting lightly on the table as the low hum of the cafe filled the space around her, normal, calm, completely disconnected from what was happening just beneath the surface. But she felt it. The shift. The moment her small advantage stopped being invisible. Her chest tightened slightly, not from panic, but from the awareness that whatever line she had just crossed, there was no stepping back from it. Slowly, she picked up her phone again, her movements controlled, careful, as if speed itself could expose her further. The profile view alert was still there, unchanged, but now it carried a different weight. It was not curiosity. It was confirmation. Ava tapped into the profile, her eyes scanning quickly, searching for anything that might give her leverage back, anything that might explain why the response came so fast. But the account was clean. Too clean. Minimal activity. No personal details. No clear pattern. It was not meant to be understood. It was meant to observe. Ava's jaw tightened slightly, her focus sharpening as she leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting briefly toward the cafe entrance, instinctively checking the room, not because she expected someone to walk in, but because she needed to ground herself in something real. The door stayed closed. The people around her stayed unaware. But her phone buzzed again. This time, it was not subtle. A sharp vibration. Ava looked down instantly. Another notification. Her main account. Restricted further. She opened it quickly, her heart rate rising just a fraction, controlled but undeniable, and what she saw made her breath catch for a split second. Her profile visibility had been reduced. Her past posts, ones that had nothing to do with tonight, were no longer appearing in search results. It was not deletion. It was suppression. Quiet. Precise. Intentional. Ava swallowed slowly, her grip tightening around the phone as the reality settled deeper. They were not just reacting to what she did now. They were rewriting her presence entirely. Her past. Her visibility. Her ability to exist in that space. Ava's eyes flickered, scanning quickly, checking again, refreshing, hoping for a glitch, but there was none. It was clean. Controlled. Final. A sharp breath left her lips, not loud, but enough to break the stillness around her as the weight of it hit. This was not about stopping one action. This was about limiting her before she could do more. Ava lowered her phone slightly, her mind racing now, faster than before, not in panic, but in calculation, trying to adjust, trying to recover something before it disappeared completely. She opened her secondary account again, her fingers moving quickly, checking the thread, checking the event, checking the connection she had just established. For a second, everything looked the same. Then it shifted. The account she had followed was gone. Not deactivated. Not hidden. Gone. The page did not exist anymore. Ava froze for a brief second, her eyes narrowing as she refreshed again. Nothing. The link was dead. Her entry point, the small fracture she had found, the one advantage she had just created, erased. Just like that. Ava leaned back slightly, her body still, her breathing slower now, but heavier, because this was not random cleanup. This was targeted. They saw exactly where she touched the system, and they removed it. No hesitation. No delay. Ava's fingers hovered over the screen, then dropped, her hand resting against the table as she stared at the blank space where that account used to be. Her first move. Gone. Her first leverage. Gone. And worse, that told them how she thought. Ava closed her eyes for a second, just one, her breath steady but tight, because now the stakes were clear in a way they had not been before. Every action she took was not just a move forward. It was exposure. Data. Information they could use to predict her next step. Her phone buzzed again. Another message request. Same blank identifier. Ava opened it slowly, her chest tightening again, not from fear, but from the weight of what she already knew it would be. The message appeared. Short. Clean. Final. You are learning. That makes you more dangerous. It also makes you easier to isolate. Ava stared at the words, her pulse steady but heavy, each sentence landing with precision, not emotional, not aggressive, just true in a way she could not ignore. Her fingers trembled slightly, not visibly, but enough that she felt it, enough that it broke the control she had been holding on to since she sat down. She looked up again, her eyes scanning the cafe, but now everything felt different. The conversations, the movement, the silence. It all felt distant, like she was no longer part of it, like she had been pushed just outside of normal without realizing it. Ava lowered her phone slowly, placing it on the table, her hand resting beside it as she stared forward, her thoughts no longer racing, just heavy, pressing down, layer after layer. She had tried to push back. She had tried to test the system, and the system had answered. Not loudly, not violently, but completely. It had taken her visibility. It had removed her access. It had erased her advantage. and it had done it faster than she could react. Ava's shoulders dropped slightly, not in surrender, but in exhaustion, the kind that comes when you realize the scale of what you are up against is far beyond what you can control right now. Her breath came slower, deeper, but it did not bring relief. It only made the weight clearer. She was still sitting there, still thinking, still trying. But for the first time since she made the decision to fight back, she felt it fully. The edge, the limit, the place where pushing forward did not feel like strength anymore. It felt like stepping into something that could break her completely. Ava did not pick up the phone again. She left it on the table, screen dark, silent, as if touching it would pull her deeper into something she was no longer sure she could survive. The cafe noise faded into the background, voices blending into a distant hum that no longer reached her, like she was sitting behind glass, watching a world that still moved while hers had quietly stopped. Her hands rested in her lap now, fingers loosely intertwined, not tense, not shaking, just still, the kind of stillness that comes when there is nothing left to react to. She stared ahead, unfocused, her thoughts no longer racing, no longer trying to solve, no longer trying to fight. They had already moved faster than her. They had already taken everything she had just built. The small advantage, the access, the visibility, gone. Not destroyed loudly, not even explained, just removed. Ava swallowed slowly, her throat tight, not from tears, but from the weight of understanding that settled deeper with every passing second. This was not a system she could argue with, not something she could outpace, not something she could confront directly. And for a moment, just a moment, the thought came quietly, dangerously, that maybe she should stop. The idea did not feel like surrender at first. It felt like relief, like stepping away from something too big to hold, too complex to break, too controlled to change. Ava closed her eyes briefly, her breathing slow, steady, but heavy, as if each breath had to pass through something thick before it reached her chest. The humiliation replayed in her mind, not as a sharp moment anymore, but as a dull, persistent echo. The way people looked at her, the way no one stepped in, the way everything she tried to say afterward was erased before it could exist. It was not just what happened, it was what it meant, that she could be reduced to a moment, controlled, defined, and then silenced. Ava opened her eyes again, but she did not move. Her gaze remained forward, distant, her body still, her mind quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, almost empty. She was not planning, not analyzing, just feeling the full weight of where she was. And for the first time since this began, she allowed herself to acknowledge it without resistance. She was outmatched. Completely. The system did not just respond to her actions. It anticipated them, adjusted around them, closed gaps before she even understood where they were. Ava's lips parted slightly, a small breath escaping as the realization settled. Fully. She was not just behind. She was playing a game where she did not know the rules. Her fingers shifted slightly in her lap, a small movement, almost unnoticeable, but it broke the stillness just enough for something else to surface beneath it. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something more dangerous. A question. If they could do all of this, then why was she still here? Ava's brow tightened slightly, her focus pulling inward again, not outward, not toward the system, but toward herself. They had erased her post. They had removed her access. They had suppressed her visibility. But they had not removed her entirely. Not yet. That detail sat there, small but persistent, refusing to disappear. Ava's breathing shifted slightly, deeper now, more intentional, as her mind began to move again, slowly at first, carefully, like she was stepping onto unstable ground. They were controlling the narrative. They were limiting her reach. They were isolating her influence. But they were still watching. Ava's eyes flickered briefly toward the phone on the table, the dark screen reflecting a faint outline of her face. And something about that reflection felt different now. Not broken, not defeated, just quiet. Too quiet. Her jaw tightened slightly, her fingers uncurling slowly as the stillness inside her began to change shape, not disappearing, but focusing, condensing into something more precise. She had tried to act quickly. She had tried to push back. And she had lost. Completely. So maybe that was not the way. Ava lowered her gaze slightly, her thoughts aligning, not faster, but clearer, sharper, stripped of the urgency that had driven her before. If speed exposed her, then she would slow down. If visibility made her a target, then she would disappear. Not in fear, in strategy. Ava reached forward slowly, her hand hovering over the phone for a second before she picked it up again, her movements calm, controlled, almost detached now. She did not open her main account. She did not check the messages. Instead, she powered the device off completely. The screen went black. Silent. Final. Ava set it back down on the table, her posture straightening slightly as she leaned back in her chair, her gaze lifting, not searching, not reacting, just present. The weight had not lifted. The pressure was still there. The system was still far beyond her. But something inside her had shifted in a way that was not visible, not loud, not immediate. She was no longer trying to break it. She was learning how to move inside it without being seen. Ava exhaled slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, but steady, certain in a way it had not been before. Then I stopped playing their way. Ava did not rush out of the cafe. That was the first deliberate choice she made that felt different from everything before. She stayed seated for a moment longer, her posture relaxed, her breathing even, her eyes no longer scanning in panic but observing with purpose. The noise around her returned slowly, not as a distraction, but as information. Conversations. Laughter. Movement. None of it was random anymore. Everything had patterns. Everything had structure. And for the first time, she was not overwhelmed by it. She was studying it. Ava reached for her coat, slipping it on with a calm, controlled motion, her fingers steady, her mind already shifting into a new rhythm. The version of her who reacted, who tried to fight immediately, who believed truth alone could break through what she faced, that version was gone. Not destroyed. Replaced. Ava stood up, her chair sliding back with a soft sound, barely noticeable, and walked toward the exit without hesitation. Each step was measured, not slow, not fast, just precise, as if she had already decided where she was going before she even moved. Outside, the air was colder now, sharper against her skin, but it grounded her, pulled her fully into the present, into the reality she now understood was layered with forces she could not see but could learn to navigate. She did not reach for her phone. Not anymore. That connection had already shown her its limits. Instead, she relied on what she could control. Her awareness. Her movement. Her choices. Ava walked down the street, her gaze forward, but her attention wide, noticing small things she would have ignored before. A security camera angled slightly differently than the others. A car idling longer than necessary. A group of people repeating the same conversation pattern without realizing it. None of these details meant everything. But together, they meant something. Ava slowed near a crosswalk, the red light reflecting across the pavement, and for a brief second, she stopped completely. Not because she had to, because she chose to. She let the moment settle, her thoughts aligning not around emotion, but around structure. Power was not just about control. It was about timing, about visibility, about knowing when to act and when not to. Ava stepped forward again as the light changed, her movement smooth, uninterrupted, blending into the flow of the city, not standing out, not drawing attention. That was the difference now. She was no longer trying to be seen. She was learning how not to be. Her mind replayed everything that had happened, but not as memories. As data. Ryan's behavior. The restaurant. The speed of the narrative. The removal of her response. The message. The suppression. The system had shown her something important. Not just its strength. Its priorities. It reacted fastest to disruption that threatened control. But it did not act blindly. It acted with precision. Which meant it could be predicted. Ava turned down another street. Quieter now. Her footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. Her reflection briefly catching in a storefront window. She glanced at it, just for a second, and paused again, this time intentionally. The woman looking back at her did not look like someone who had just been humiliated. Did not look like someone who had been erased. There was no visible anger. No desperation. Just stillness. Controlled. Focused. Ava tilted her head slightly, studying that reflection as if it belonged to someone else. As if she was meeting this version of herself for the first time. Because in a way she was. The pain was still there. The memory had not faded. But it no longer dictated her next move. It informed it. Ava straightened slightly, her shoulders aligning, her posture shifting in a way that was subtle but undeniable. She was no longer asking what had happened to her. She was asking what could be done with it. That shift was quiet, invisible, but absolute. Ava stepped away from the glass, her reflection disappearing behind her as she continued forward, her pace steady, her mind already mapping the next steps, not fully formed yet, but no longer chaotic. Structured, layered, strategic. She would not confront them directly. Not yet. She would not react in ways they could predict. Not anymore. She would observe, learn, adapt, and then move. Ava reached the end of the block and stopped again, her gaze lifting slightly as she looked out over the street ahead, the city stretching out in front of her like a system she had only just begun to understand. Her breath came slow, controlled, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharper than before. And in that moment, without saying it out loud, without needing to prove it to anyone but herself, one truth settled into place with quiet certainty. She was not the same woman who walked into that restaurant. She was not the same woman who stood in the rain. She was not the same woman who tried to fight back blindly. She had changed, and whatever came next, they would not be dealing with the same person anymore. Ava did not go home. That would have been the old instinct: retreat, isolate, recover. But recovery was no longer her priority. Position was. She turned onto a busier street, blending into the late evening flow, her pace steady, her expression neutral, but her mind already executing the first real move she had chosen, not reacted to. She stepped into a small convenience store, the kind that stayed open all night, fluorescent lights humming overhead, cameras visible but ordinary, nothing tied directly to the network she had just traced. That mattered. She needed space outside their immediate control, even if it was temporary. Ava walked past the aisle slowly, not shopping, not browsing, just creating time, letting her thoughts align with precision. The system responded fastest to direct disruption. It corrected narratives. It erased noise. But it relied on something critical to function at scale: predictability. Ava stopped near a shelf, her gaze drifting over items she did not register, because her attention was elsewhere, mapping out the next step with clarity that felt almost unfamiliar in its calmness. She could not attack the system directly. She could not defend herself within it. But she could influence how it allocated attention. That was the gap. That was where she would move. Ava reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a second phone, older, rarely used, one she kept powered off most of the time. She turned it on slowly, her movements deliberate, her breathing steady, because this device was not connected to her main identity, not yet touched by the system's suppression. It was clean. For now. The screen lit up, simple, minimal, and Ava opened a browser instead of any social platform, avoiding direct entry points, avoiding patterns they could track easily. She searched for local event boards, independent listings, smaller communities that were not fully integrated into the controlled flow she had seen earlier. Her fingers moved carefully, not rushing, not hesitating, just precise. Then she found it. A secondary mention of the same private event, but not from the main network. A third-party listing, outdated, incomplete, but still visible. Ava's eyes sharpened slightly. This was outside their primary control layer. That meant slower reaction time. Ava did not smile, but something inside her aligned with quiet certainty. She opened a forum attached to that listing, small, almost inactive, a handful of users, scattered posts, nothing significant at first glance. Perfect. Ava created a new account, no personal details, no pattern, just a blank presence, and paused for a moment before typing. Not a direct claim, not an accusation, just a seed. Strange how certain private events seem to coordinate public narratives ahead of time. Anyone else noticing this pattern? She read it once, adjusted a single word, then posted it without hesitation. Ava leaned back slightly, her eyes fixed on the screen, not expecting immediate traction, because that was not the goal. The goal was placement. Outside their main control, where reaction would be slower, where patterns might spread before being corrected. Seconds passed. Then a minute. One reply. Curious. Another. Questioning. Ava did not engage further. She let it grow naturally, resisting the urge to push, because she understood now, control was not about volume. It was about direction. Ava powered off the second phone again, cutting the connection before it could fully register, before it could be traced in real time, and slipped it back into her pocket. Her breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged, but inside, the shift was undeniable. This was no longer reaction. This was influence. Ava walked to the counter, bought a bottle of water she did not need, a simple action, ordinary, grounding, and stepped back out into the street, the cool air meeting her again, but this time it felt different. Not cold. Clear. Her main phone remained off. Her presence reduced. Her visibility controlled by her own choice, not theirs. And somewhere, outside the system's immediate reach, a question she planted was beginning to exist without being erased instantly. Ava walked forward, her gaze steady, her steps aligned with something deeper than instinct now, because, for the first time since everything began, she had not just touched the system, she had moved around it. And as she continued down the street, her mind quiet but precise, one realization settled in with a weight that felt almost unfamiliar. She had just created influence in a place they did not fully control, and that meant something had changed, not in them, but in her ability to reach beyond them. Ava felt it before she saw him. Not a sound, not a movement, but a shift in the rhythm of the street, subtle, almost imperceptible, like something had stepped into alignment with her path instead of crossing it. She did not stop walking. That was the first rule she set for herself. Do not react first. Her steps remained even, her gaze forward, but her awareness sharpened instantly, pulling in details without turning her head, reflections in glass, shadows stretching across the pavement, the quiet change in presence behind her. Then his voice came, low, controlled, close enough to reach her without forcing her to turn. You adapted faster than expected. Ava did not flinch. She let the words settle, let the tone carry its meaning, not curiosity, not surprise, but assessment. Always assessment. She slowed just slightly, not enough to signal hesitation, just enough to allow space for the moment to form, then stopped at the edge of a crosswalk, the red light casting a faint glow across the ground. Only then did she turn. He stood a few feet away, exactly where she would expect him to be, not too close, not too far, positioned with the same deliberate control she had come to recognize. The man in black. Unchanged. Still unreadable. Ava held his gaze, not challenging, not avoiding, simply meeting it with the same level of stillness he used against her. You are watching more closely now, she said, her voice calm, steady, not a question. He did not deny it. A small pause followed, not empty, but weighted, like both of them were measuring how much to reveal and how much to hold back. Ava felt it clearly now, the tension, not loud, not aggressive, but precise, like a line drawn between them that neither of them crossed, but both fully understood. You moved outside the main channels, he said after a moment, his tone even, almost neutral. That was not random. Ava's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something sharper, more controlled. Nothing is random, she replied, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged. You taught me that. Another pause. This one longer. Ava could feel it, the shift, subtle but real, like something in his perception of her had adjusted, not dramatically, but enough to matter. She did not rush to fill the silence. That was another rule now. Let them speak into the space they expect you to fill. He took a step closer, minimal, controlled, but enough to change the distance between them, enough to test her reaction. Ava did not move. Not forward. Not back. She held her position, her gaze unwavering, her breathing even, because this was not about proximity. It was about control. You created noise where there was none, he said quietly, outside the system. Ava tilted her head slightly, considering his words, not as information, but as confirmation. He knew. Of course he knew. The question was not what he knew. It was what he would do with it. And you did not shut it down, she responded, her voice just as quiet, just as precise, not immediately. That was the first real test she gave him. Not aggressive, not direct, just a statement placed carefully, waiting to see how he would respond. Another silence. Ava watched him closely now, not for obvious reactions, but for the smallest shift, a breath, a pause, a change in focus. Something. Not everything needs to be removed, he said finally, and that answer landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition, because that was not a denial. It was a strategy. Her mind moved quickly, aligning that statement with everything she had observed, the suppression, the correction, the patterns, and now this. Selective control. Not absolute. Ava took a slow breath, her posture still relaxed, but her presence sharper now, more defined. So you let certain things exist, she said, her voice carrying a slight edge now, not emotional, but intentional, to see what they attract. He did not answer right away, but he did not need to. The silence itself confirmed enough. Ava felt it then, clearly, the shift in the dynamic, small, fragile, but undeniable. She was no longer just reacting to the system. She was interacting with it. And more importantly, it was interacting back. You are testing me, she said, her tone steady, her eyes locked on his, not accusing, just stating what had become obvious. He held her gaze, unmoving, unreadable, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade again, the noise, the lights, the movement, all dissolving into the background as the space between them became the only thing that mattered. And you are testing us, he replied. Ava did not respond immediately. She let that sit, let the weight of it settle, because that one word changed everything. Not him, not just one observer. Us. Ava's jaw tightened slightly, not from fear, but from clarity, because now the lines were sharper, the structure more visible, the scale larger than she had allowed herself to fully accept before. She took a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to shift the balance again, her voice lower now, more controlled than ever. Then you already know, she said softly. I am not going to stop. The tension held, unbroken, unresolved, stretching between them like something waiting to snap or transform, but neither of them moved to end it, because both of them understood the same thing at the same time. This was no longer a moment. It was a game, and neither of them had shown their full hand yet. The silence between them did not break, but it shifted, like something unseen had just been placed on the table between them without either of them needing to say it out loud. Ava held his gaze, her posture steady, but her mind was already moving, not reacting to his words, but dissecting them, pulling them apart, testing what was said against what was not. Us. That word stayed with her, heavier than anything else, because it confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. He was not the system. He was part of it, which meant he had limits. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recalibration, because if he had limits, then so did the system. Then this was never just about control, she said slowly, her voice measured, each word placed with intention. It was about selection. He did not answer immediately, and that hesitation, small as it was, mattered more than a denial would have. Ava felt it, the subtle fracture in certainty, and she leaned into it, not physically, but mentally, pressing just enough to see what would shift. You do not erase everyone, she continued, her tone still calm, but sharper now. You choose who to elevate, who to suppress, and who to test. The word lingered between them. Test. Ava watched him closely, her breathing even, her pulse steady, because now she was not just observing the system. She was engaging with it at a level she had not reached before. He exhaled slowly, barely noticeable, but it was there, the first real sign of movement she had seen from him that was not perfectly controlled. Most people never notice, he said quietly, not defensive, not dismissive, just stating a fact that carried more weight than it should have. Ava's lips pressed together slightly, her mind catching on to that immediately. Most people. Not all. And the ones who do? She asked, her voice lower now, more focused, because this was no longer about her situation alone. This was about understanding the pattern behind it. Another pause. Longer this time. Ava felt it, the space stretching, not empty, but filled with something unspoken, something he was choosing not to reveal fully. But then he said it, not directly, not completely, just enough. They are given a choice. Ava did not react outwardly, but inside, something shifted, sharp and immediate, because that was not what she expected. Not elimination. Not removal. A choice. Her mind moved quickly, aligning that with everything she had experienced so far, the observation, the testing, the lack of complete shutdown, the messages that warned instead of threatened. Ava tilted her head slightly, her gaze still locked on his, but now there was something new behind it. Not just awareness. Calculation. And what exactly is the choice? she asked, her tone controlled, but carrying a quiet intensity that had not been there before. He did not answer right away. Instead, he studied her, the same way he had from the beginning, but now it felt different, less like observation, more like evaluation at a deeper level. Ava did not break eye contact. She did not look away. Because this was where the real information lived. To stay within the system, he said finally, his voice even, or to be moved outside of it. Ava's breath slowed slightly, her chest tightening just enough for her to feel it, because that phrasing was deliberate. Not inside or out. Within or moved. Passive. Controlled. Ava's mind sharpened instantly, catching the implication before she could stop it. Moved by who? She asked, her voice quieter now, but cutting through the space between them with precision. This time, he did not answer at all. And that silence was the answer. Ava held it for a moment, letting the weight of it settle, letting the absence of explanation fill in what words did not. Because if the system could choose who stayed and who was moved, then the system was not just reactive. It was selective in a way she had not fully understood before. Ava's thoughts shifted again, faster now, aligning everything she had seen, the humiliation, the setup, the speed of the narrative, the way she had been pushed, tested, observed. This was not random. And suddenly, a new possibility formed, one that felt colder than anything else she had considered so far. Ryan, she said slowly, the name deliberate, placed carefully into the space between them. The man in black did not react immediately, but Ava saw it, the smallest shift in his focus, just enough to confirm she had touched something real. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, her voice steady but quieter now, more dangerous in its calmness. He was not just part of it, she continued, her gaze unwavering. He was positioned too. The realization landed fully as she said it, not as a question, but as something she could no longer ignore. Ryan had not just humiliated her. He had played a role. Whether he understood it or not, he had been used. Ava exhaled slowly, her mind expanding around that thought, because if that was true, then everything she believed about that moment, about who was in control, shifted completely. And as the silence settled between them again, heavier than before, one detail rose quietly to the surface of her thoughts, subtle but impossible to ignore. If Ryan had been placed to break her, then someone had decided she was worth breaking in the first place. Ava did not look away when the realization settled, not because it did not affect her, but because she refused to let him see how deeply it did. If she had been chosen, if that moment had been designed around her specifically, then this was no longer about proving anything. It was about understanding why. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make it deliberate, then spoke, her voice calm, controlled, but carrying a new edge that had not been there before. So, I was not just in the wrong place, she said quietly. I was placed in the right one. He did not confirm it. He did not deny it. But Ava no longer needed him to. That was the difference now. She stepped slightly to the side, shifting the angle between them, not to create distance, but to change perspective, to make it clear she was no longer standing where he expected her to stand. And now, she continued, her eyes steady, you are still watching. A pause. Then, more precise, which means I am still part of whatever this is. He studied her again, the same measured silence, but this time it felt less like control and more like calculation adjusting in real time. Ava could feel it. The shift was subtle, but it was there. She was no longer just reacting inside the system. She was becoming a variable it had to account for. You could have been removed, he said finally, his tone even, but you were not. Ava let out a slow breath, her mind aligning around that statement immediately, not as reassurance, but as leverage. Which means I am useful, she replied without hesitation, her voice quiet but certain. That was the first real line she drew, not emotional, not defensive, but strategic. Useful was not safe, but it was position. Another pause followed, heavier this time, not empty, but filled with unspoken negotiation, the kind that happens before either side admits it is happening at all. Ava held his gaze, her posture steady, her presence controlled, because she understood something now that she had not before. This was not just observation anymore. This was interaction. And interaction could be shaped. You need something, she said, not asking, not guessing, just placing the idea between them, letting it sit there long enough to force a response. He did not react immediately, but the silence changed. Ava felt it. That was enough. And you think I can give it to you? She added, her tone sharpening just slightly, not aggressive, but intentional, because now she was not waiting for answers. She was directing the conversation. He took a small step closer again, controlled, deliberate, but this time the movement felt different, not just testing her reaction, but acknowledging the shift in dynamic between them. You are already inside something most people never see, he said quietly. That has value. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus, because that was not an answer. It was an opening. Value to who? She asked, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. Another pause. Then, carefully, to those who understand what it becomes. Ava let that settle, her mind moving quickly, parsing the layers behind his words, not taking them at face value, not trusting them, but recognizing the shape of what was being offered without it being stated directly. This was not help. This was positioning, and it came with cost. Ava tilted her head slightly, her lips pressing together for a brief second before she spoke again, softer now, but sharper, more precise. You are not offering me protection, she said. You are offering me access. That was the moment, the line, the unspoken agreement forming in the space between them without either of them naming it directly. He did not correct her. He did not soften it. And that told her everything she needed to know. Ava exhaled slowly, her posture relaxing just a fraction, not from comfort, but from clarity, because now the structure of this interaction was clear. This was not trust. This was alignment. Temporary. Conditional. And in return, she continued, her voice low, controlled, you get to see how far I go. He held her gaze, the silence stretching again, but this time it was different. Not tense. Not uncertain. Measured. Agreed. Without words. Ava felt it settle into place, not as a decision she spoke, but as one she understood the weight of. This was not safety. This was not control. This was stepping deeper into something she already knew could take everything from her if she miscalculated. But it was also movement, and standing still was no longer an option. Ava took a small step forward, closing the space between them just enough to shift the balance again, her voice quiet, steady, but final in its intent. Then do not interfere, she said, each word deliberate. Just watch. Another pause. Longer. He did not agree. He did not refuse. But he did not walk away either. And that was the answer. Ava stepped back, turning slightly, her gaze breaking from his. For the first time since the conversation began, not because she was done, but because she had already taken what she needed from this moment. Information. Position. A fragile alignment that could shift at any second. She started walking again, her pace steady, her expression unreadable, but her awareness sharper than ever, because now she understood something that mattered more than anything else. This was no longer just her fight against the system. It was a game she had chosen to step into, with players who were watching her not as a victim, but as something they might use. And as she moved forward, the weight of that settled in fully, not as fear, but as calculation, because the line she had just crossed was not one she could step back from. And if she misjudged, even once, the same system that chose not to remove her could decide to. Ava kept walking, but the space he left behind did not disappear with distance. It stayed with her, quiet, persistent, threading through her thoughts in a way that felt unfamiliar, not because she trusted him, but because for the first time since everything began, someone inside that system had spoken to her without trying to erase her. That alone was dangerous. She slowed slightly as she turned onto another street, her footsteps softer now, her breathing steady, but her mind no longer focused on patterns or structures. It shifted inward, and that was where the real tension began. Because strategy was clean, predictable, safe in its own way, but what she felt right now was not. Ava exhaled slowly, her gaze lowering for just a second, enough to break the rhythm she had built so carefully. His words replayed, not the surface meaning, but the tone, the pauses, the way he had chosen what to reveal and what to leave unsaid. He had not threatened her. He had not tried to control her directly. He had allowed her to move. And that was where the fracture formed. Because allowance created space. And space could be mistaken for trust. Ava's jaw tightened slightly as she caught that thought immediately, cutting it off before it could settle deeper. No, not trust. Never that. But the fact that her mind even moved in that direction, even for a second, was enough to unsettle her more than anything the system had done so far. She stopped walking. Not because she needed to. Because she had to. The city moved around her, distant again, but this time it was not the system that faded out. It was her own certainty. Ava closed her eyes briefly, her breath slow, controlled, but heavier now, because this was not about what she was facing anymore. It was about what she was becoming inside it. Trust was a liability. Connection was leverage, but only if controlled. Hope was the most dangerous thing of all. And yet, something about the way he had looked at her, not as someone to be erased, not as someone to be controlled, but as something worth watching, worth engaging with, it lingered in a way she could not ignore completely. Ava opened her eyes again, her gaze sharper now, but the conflict remained, quiet, pressing, demanding resolution. If she used him, she gained access. If she trusted him, even slightly, she lost control. And in this system, control was survival. Ava's fingers curled slightly at her sides, her posture still, her thoughts aligning again, but this time with resistance, because part of her, small but present, recognized the possibility that he was not just another piece on the board, that he might see things she did not, that he might offer something more than access. And that was exactly why it was dangerous. Ava let out a slow breath, her eyes lifting, focusing again, forcing clarity over instinct, because she understood now, more clearly than ever, that this was not just a game of power. It was a game of perception. And the moment she allowed herself to believe in anything beyond strategy, she would lose. Not immediately, not visibly, but completely. She turned slightly, her gaze tracing the street behind her for just a second, as if expecting to see him still there, still watching, still part of the space she occupied. But he was gone. And somehow, that made the conflict sharper, not weaker. Because now, the choice was entirely hers. No pressure, no push, just decision. Ava's breathing steadied again, her posture straightening as the hesitation began to dissolve, not into certainty, but into resolve. She could not afford to trust him. She could not afford to believe in anything that was not under her control. Not here. Not in this system. Not after everything she had already seen. Ava's expression hardened slightly, not outwardly, but in a way that shifted her presence completely, closing off the space where doubt had just existed. She reached into her coat pocket, not for her phone, not for connection, but as a grounding motion, something physical to anchor the decision forming inside her. This was not about what he might offer. This was about what she could take without giving anything in return. Ava stepped forward again, her pace steady, her direction clear, the hesitation gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, more defined. She would work with him. She would use the access. She would learn everything she could. But she would not trust him. Not his words. Not his intentions. Not the space he created. Because that space was where control slipped. Ava's eyes focused ahead, her expression unreadable now, her presence aligned completely with the strategy she had chosen, and as the city opened in front of her once again, one truth settled into place with absolute clarity. She would not let emotion dictate her path. Not anymore. Not here. Not ever again. Whatever connection existed between them, she would treat it as a variable, nothing more, nothing less, because in this world, the moment she allowed herself to feel anything beyond calculation would be the moment she lost everything. Ava did not look back again. That was intentional. Looking back was instinct. Moving forward without checking was strategy. Her steps were steady, her pace controlled, but her mind was already several moves ahead, not reacting to what had happened, but constructing what would happen next. Not a response, a design. She turned into a quieter district, where the noise of the city softened into distance, where patterns became easier to isolate, easier to manipulate. That was what she needed now. Space. Not to hide. To build. Ava stopped under a dim streetlight, her reflection faint against the glass of a closed storefront, and for a moment, she allowed herself to stand still again, not because she was uncertain, but because stillness sharpened clarity. The system responded to disruption. It corrected narrative. It suppressed visibility. But it relied on something fundamental to maintain control. It needed to understand what it was reacting to. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly as that thought settled into something more structured, more dangerous. If they could not fully understand the input, they could not fully control the outcome. That was the opening. Ava reached into her pocket and pulled out the second phone again, her movements slower now, more deliberate, as if each action carried weight beyond itself. She powered it on, but this time, she did not search. She did not browse. She created a new account, another layer, not to interact, to exist. She left it empty, no posts, no follows, no signals, just a presence placed quietly into the system, like a marker she could return to later. Then she powered it off again. Layer 1. Ava slipped the phone away, her thoughts moving seamlessly into the next phase. Information alone was not enough. Information had to be carried, distorted, reframed. She needed a vector. Not obvious, not traceable. Ava resumed walking, her route shifting again, this time toward a busier intersection, where people moved faster, where attention fractured naturally. She stepped into a small co-working space that stayed open late, the kind filled with freelancers, remote workers, people who existed in digital spaces without being tied to one identity. Perfect. Ava sat down at an empty desk, her posture relaxed, her presence unremarkable, and reached for a public terminal, not her device, not her network. A third layer. She logged into nothing, left no name, no trace of ownership. And then she began. Not a post, not a statement, a pattern. She seeded fragments of information across different small forums, not connected directly, not identical, but aligned just enough to create direction without revealing origin. A mention of coordinated narratives, a question about event ownership, a subtle reference to timing discrepancies, each piece incomplete on its own. Together, suggestive. Ava paused between each action, spacing them out, allowing time to stretch between inputs, because timing mattered as much as content. Too fast, and it would be flagged. Too slow, and it would not connect. This had to feel organic, uncontrolled. That was the illusion she was building. Layer 2. She leaned back slightly, her eyes scanning the room, not for people, but for behavior, making sure nothing in her movement broke the pattern she was creating. Everything had to align. Everything had to disappear into normal. Ava closed the browser, wiped the session clean, and stood up without hesitation. No lingering. No second look. The work was done, but the system would not react yet. Not immediately. That was the final piece. Ava stepped back outside, the night air cooler now, sharper, her breath steady as she walked again, her mind moving into the final layer. The trigger. Information placed. Vectors established. Now pressure. Ava reached into her coat pocket, pulling out her main phone, still powered off, and held it there for a second before turning it on. The screen lit up slowly, reconnecting, pulling her back into the system she had just stepped outside of. This time, she did not check messages. She did not open her account. Instead, she searched for the original video again. It was still there, controlled, positioned, exactly where they wanted it. Ava stared at it for a moment, her expression unreadable, her thoughts precise. Then, without hesitation, she opened a new post draft. Not emotional, not defensive, just a single line, carefully chosen. Funny how some stories are pushed faster than they can actually happen. She did not post it. Not yet. She saved it. Let it sit. Because this was not about the message. It was about the timing of its release. Ava locked her phone again, slipping it back into her pocket, her steps continuing forward, her presence blending into the city once more, but now everything was in motion. Quietly, invisibly, a pattern forming beneath the surface, information spreading where it should not, attention beginning to shift in places the system did not prioritize, and a trigger waiting, timed, calculated, ready to activate when the structure was just unstable enough to react unpredictably. Ava's gaze lifted slightly, her expression calm, but her mind fully engaged, tracking every layer she had set into place, because she understood now, more clearly than ever, that this was not about one move. It was about convergence. And somewhere beneath the surface of everything she had just set in motion, the system was about to respond. Without realizing it was already stepping into something she had designed. Ava felt it before she saw it. That subtle distortion in the rhythm she had carefully built, the kind that did not belong to the system reacting, but to something else entirely, something unscripted. She kept walking, her posture steady, her expression unchanged, but her mind sharpened instantly, scanning through every layer she had set in motion, checking alignment, timing, sequence. Everything should have been converging slowly, predictably. The fragments she seeded should have stayed small, contained, just enough to grow under the surface before triggering attention. But something had accelerated. Ava's phone buzzed once, sharp, immediate, breaking the silence she had been holding. She stopped, not abruptly, but just enough to anchor herself before pulling it out, her fingers controlled as she unlocked the screen. And there it was. One of the smaller threads she had placed, the one buried deep in a forum that should not have gained traction this quickly, was no longer small. It had spiked. Replies multiplying. Shares linking outward. Not gradual. Not organic. Fast. Too fast. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, her pulse tightening, not from panic, but from recognition. This was not the system correcting her input. This was amplification. But not hers. She scrolled quickly, her mind tracking the pattern, the phrasing, the responses, and something felt wrong immediately. The tone had shifted. What she had planted as subtle doubt had been reframed into something sharper, more direct, more accusatory. The language was no longer exploratory. It was pointed, aggressive. Ava's fingers paused mid-scroll, her breathing slowing, heavier now, because this was not how she designed it. Someone had taken her signal and pushed it further. Ava's gaze flickered across the usernames, scanning for repetition, for coordination, for anything that matched the system she had studied. But this felt different. Less controlled. Less precise. Almost reckless. And that was the problem. Recklessness attracted attention faster than subtlety ever could. Ava locked her phone for a second, her eyes lifting, scanning the street instinctively, not for a person, but for pattern shifts, for anything that indicated the system had already reacted to this spike. Then her phone buzzed again. This time, multiple notifications. Not from her secondary placements. From her main presence. Ava's chest tightened slightly as she unlocked it again, her focus snapping back to the screen. The original video. It had changed. Not removed. Not suppressed. Elevated. Pushed higher. More visibility. More engagement. But the narrative had shifted slightly, just enough to counter the emerging doubt. Ava stared at it, her mind aligning the pieces instantly. This was response. Fast. Targeted. But not to her original plan. To the distortion of it. Someone else had accelerated the signal, and the system had reacted to that instead of her controlled setup. Ava exhaled slowly, her grip tightening just enough to feel it, because this changed everything. Her timing was off now. Her layers were misaligned. The pressure she planned to apply later was already triggering early. Ava's thoughts moved quickly, recalculating, trying to regain control, trying to identify the variable that had entered her system without her permission. Was it them? Testing her again? Or someone else entirely? Someone who saw the same pattern she did, but without the discipline to move carefully inside it? Ava scrolled again, deeper now, her eyes scanning faster, and then she saw it. A reply. Buried, but not enough. A phrasing that mirrored her original structure too closely, but extended it in a way she had not written. Ava's breath slowed, her focus locking onto it, because this was not coincidence. Someone had followed her pattern. Not exactly, but close enough. Which meant one thing. She was not the only one observing the system. Ava lowered her phone slightly, her gaze unfocused for a brief second as her mind expanded around that realization, because this was no longer a controlled environment. This was no longer her game alone. Other players existed. Unknown. Unpredictable. And they were moving inside the same space she had just entered. Ava's jaw tightened, her posture still, her thoughts aligning again, but now under pressure, because this changed the rules. She was no longer just manipulating the system. She was competing inside it. And worse, she did not know who else was playing. Her phone buzzed again, sharper this time, and when she looked down, the message was already open, from the same blank identifier. You moved too soon. Ava stared at the words, her expression unreadable, but her pulse steady and heavy, because this was not a warning. This was confirmation. The system had noticed the shift, but not the way she intended. Ava exhaled slowly, her eyes lifting from the screen, her gaze steady as the realization settled fully into place. colder, and more precise than anything before. This was no longer just about controlling the system. It was about surviving inside a space where control was constantly shifting, where variables moved without warning, where even the smallest miscalculation could trigger consequences she could not predict. Ava slipped her phone back into her pocket, her steps resuming, steady but sharper now, her mind already adjusting, already preparing to respond. But one truth remained clear, undeniable, and heavier than anything else. This was not going according to plan, not even close. And whatever she thought she understood about how this system worked was no longer enough to stay ahead of it. Ava did not stop walking, but everything inside her slowed down with precision, like a system recalibrating after a shock. The disruption had broken her timing, fractured her control, introduced a variable she could not predict, but it had also revealed something more valuable than any clean execution ever could. The system did not just react to her. It reacted to noise it could not immediately classify. That was the weakness. Ava's breathing steadied, her posture aligned again, the tension in her chest compressing into something sharper, more focused, no longer scattered. She had not lost control. She had been shown where control actually lived. She pulled her phone out again, not with urgency, not with frustration, but with intent, her fingers moving slower now, more deliberate, as she reopened the thread that had spiraled beyond her design. The chaos was still there. Fractured narratives, competing interpretations, amplification without structure. Ava studied it carefully, her eyes scanning not for what was being said, but for how the system was responding to it. Which posts stayed, which disappeared, which accounts gained visibility. And then she saw it. The system was not correcting everything anymore. It was prioritizing containment. It allowed certain threads to exist as long as they did not unify into a single, controlled narrative. Ava's lips pressed together slightly, her mind locking onto that pattern instantly. Fragmentation slowed them down. Unity triggered suppression. That was the shift. Ava scrolled further, isolating the external interference, the unknown variable that had pushed her signal too far, too fast. Instead of trying to suppress it, she began mapping it, tracking how it moved, how it phrased things, how it attracted attention. It was reckless, but it was effective in one way she had not fully accounted for. It created noise the system could not immediately neutralize without exposing its own control. Ava exhaled slowly, her thoughts aligning into something new, something sharper than her original plan. She would not fight the interference. She would use it. Ava stepped into a narrow alleyway, quieter, more contained, a place where she could stand still without drawing attention, and pulled out the second phone again, powering it on with calm precision. This time, she did not create new signals. She redirected existing ones. She located the most aggressive thread, the one that had deviated furthest from her original structure, and subtly reinforced it, not by adding more noise, but by refining its direction, adjusting its phrasing just enough to align it with the patterns she had originally intended, but at a scale she could not have created alone. Ava paused between each input, spacing them carefully, letting the system register them as organic continuation rather than coordinated manipulation. She was not controlling the chaos. She was shaping it. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed, but her focus absolute, because now every second mattered. Every adjustment had to land within the system's blind spot before it recalibrated again. Ava powered off the second phone, slipping it back into her pocket, her gaze lifting slightly as she stepped out of the alley, re-entering the flow of the city, her presence blending seamlessly once more. Her main phone buzzed again, but this time she did not hesitate. She unlocked it, her eyes scanning the changes, and there it was. The narrative had shifted. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough. The original video was still visible, but now it was no longer dominant. Competing interpretations had fractured its impact, pulling attention in multiple directions, slowing the system's ability to reinforce a single version of events. Ava's chest rose slowly, not in relief, but in recognition. This was leverage. Real leverage. Not control. Not yet. But influence that could not be erased instantly without consequence. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly as she tracked the engagement patterns, watching how the system responded, how it hesitated, how it chose where to intervene and where to wait. And then she saw it again. The unknown variable. the account that had pushed her signal beyond her design. It was still active, still moving, but now it had adjusted. Its tone had shifted slightly, more aligned, more precise. Ava stilled for a fraction of a second, her mind locking onto that change, because this was no longer random interference. This was adaptation. Someone else was learning too. Her grip on the phone tightened slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what that meant. She was not alone in this space anymore. But instead of pulling back, instead of retreating, Ava leaned into it, her thoughts sharpening into something more dangerous than before. If multiple forces were moving inside the system, then the system itself could be overwhelmed. Not broken. Not yet. But destabilized. Ava slipped her phone back into her pocket, her steps steady, her gaze forward, but her presence completely different now. More controlled, more calculated, more aware of the layers moving beneath everything she saw. She had not regained full control, but she had found something better. A point where the system could not fully predict her. And as she continued walking, her expression unreadable, her mind already building the next sequence, one truth settled into place with quiet certainty. She now had a variable the system could not easily eliminate, and that made her far more dangerous than before. Ava did not slow down, but something fundamental had changed in the way she moved, in the way the world seemed to respond to her presence, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but undeniable once she recognized it. The system was no longer simply reacting to her actions. It was hesitating. That hesitation was everything. Ava stepped into a crowded intersection, the noise rising around her, headlights flashing, conversations overlapping, but her focus remained sharp, locked onto the invisible structure beneath it all. The fragmented narratives she had shaped were no longer isolated threads. They were beginning to intersect. That was the difference. Not noise. Convergence. Ava pulled her phone out again, her movements calm, controlled, as she opened the main feed where the original video still existed, but no longer dominated the space the way it had before. It was surrounded now. Questions. Doubt. Conflicting interpretations that the system could not fully suppress without drawing attention to itself. Ava's eyes scanned the engagement patterns, her mind tracking the flow, the pressure points, and then she saw it. A cluster of accounts, previously aligned with the original narrative, had slowed their activity. Not stopped. Slowed. That was not random. That was recalibration. Ava's lips pressed together slightly, her thoughts sharpening, because this was the first visible crack in control. The system was no longer pushing a single direction. It was adapting to uncertainty. And uncertainty could be controlled. Ava turned slightly, stepping out of the main flow of pedestrians, her back against a building for a brief moment, as she focused entirely on the screen. She opened the thread where the unknown variable had been most active, the one she had redirected, refined, and now, it was stabilizing. Not chaotic anymore. Structured. Someone else had followed her adjustments. Ava's breath slowed, her pulse steady, because this was no longer coincidence. This was synchronization. She was not controlling that other presence, but she was influencing its direction. And that created something new. Not just a variable. A network. Ava's fingers moved again, carefully, deliberately, placing one more piece into the system. Not loud, not direct, but positioned exactly where the tension was highest, where the conflicting narratives intersected. If the story was real, it would not need this much control to stay consistent. She posted it from her secondary layer, timed precisely between two high engagement responses, letting it slip into the flow without standing out. Then she waited. Not passively. Intentionally. Seconds passed. Then the shift began. The replies did not explode. They realigned. The conversation pivoted. Not away from the original narrative completely, but toward questioning the structure behind it. Ava watched it happen, her eyes steady, her breathing controlled, because this was the moment. The first real moment where she was not reacting, not adapting, but directing. The system responded. Of course it did. But slower now. More carefully. It began to suppress certain threads again, but each suppression created more visibility for the idea that something was being controlled. Ava's jaw tightened slightly, not from tension, but from focus, because this was the balance she had been searching for. Push too hard, and the system erased you. Push precisely, and the system exposed itself. Ava stepped away from the wall, merging back into the crowd, her posture relaxed, her presence unremarkable, but her influence now embedded in the flow of information around her. Her phone buzzed again. She did not rush to check it. That was another change. Control meant not reacting immediately. When she finally looked, the notification was simple. A message. Not from the blank identifier. Not from the unknown variable. A different account. Verified. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly as she opened it, her focus sharpening instantly. The message was short. We need to talk. No explanation. No context. But the account itself. Ava recognized the name. A public figure tied loosely to the same network she had traced earlier. Not central, but connected. Ava stared at the screen for a second longer, her mind moving quickly, because this was not random outreach. This was reaction. The system was no longer just observing her. It was engaging. Carefully. Indirectly. Ava locked her phone, slipping it back into her pocket, her steps steady as she continued forward, but her awareness expanded again, because now the shift was no longer subtle. It was visible. People around her were not looking at her directly, but the space felt different. Conversations paused slightly when she passed. A glance held just a fraction longer than it should. Not recognition. Not yet. But awareness. Ava's expression remained neutral, her posture unchanged, but inside, the alignment was complete. She had moved from being controlled to controlling something the system depended on. Narrative flow. And that changed everything. Ava slowed slightly as she reached the end of the block, her gaze lifting, her eyes sharper than ever, because now she understood the weight of what she had just done. This was no longer survival. This was influence. Real influence. And as she stood there, still, composed, her presence cutting quietly through the movement around her, the reaction became clearer, not loud, not obvious, but unmistakable. The system was no longer just watching her. It was adjusting around her, and the people closest to it were starting to notice, their behavior shifting just enough, their attention tightening just slightly, because something about her had changed in a way they could not fully explain, but could no longer ignore. Ava felt him before she saw him again, but this time it was different. Not the quiet, controlled presence that blended into the system like a shadow, but something sharper, more immediate, like a disruption that did not fully belong to the pattern anymore. She did not turn right away. She let the moment stretch, her breathing steady, her posture relaxed, because she understood something now that she had not before. If he approached her, it was no longer just observation. It was reaction. You changed the flow, his voice came, closer than before, less distant, and for the first time, there was something in it that did not align perfectly with control. Ava turned slowly, her gaze meeting his, not searching, not questioning, just measuring. He stood there the same way he always had, composed, precise, but something in the stillness had shifted. It was tighter, less fluid. Ava noticed it immediately. She did not smile. She did not react. But inside, something settled into place with quiet certainty. No, she said calmly, her voice even. I stopped letting you control it. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not a calculated pause. It was a moment where something had to be processed. Ava watched him closely, her eyes sharp, her awareness focused entirely on the smallest details, the micro shifts in his posture, the slight delay in his response, the way his gaze held hers just a fraction longer than it used to. He was no longer just evaluating. He was adjusting. You accelerated something that was meant to stay contained, he said finally, but the tone had changed, not a statement of fact, but something closer to pressure, like he was testing how far she had gone without fully revealing what it cost. Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression calm, but her voice carried a new weight now, something grounded, something undeniable. And yet it is still running, she replied, her words precise, controlled, which means you cannot stop it without exposing it. Another silence. He did not deny it. Ava felt it again, that shift, clearer now, stronger, like the balance between them had moved just enough to be undeniable. She was no longer operating beneath him. She was operating alongside the system, inside its blind spots, in ways it could not fully predict anymore. You are forcing instability, he said, and this time, there was something under the words, not anger, not frustration, but something closer to concern, controlled but present. Ava's gaze sharpened slightly, Not because of the words, but because of what they revealed. He was not just watching the system. He was affected by it. No, she corrected softly, stepping slightly closer, not aggressively, but with intention, closing the distance just enough to shift the space between them. I am showing you it was never stable to begin with. The words landed, and this time, he did not respond immediately. Ava saw it, the break in rhythm, the moment where control did not come instantly, where something had to be recalculated instead of executed. That was new. That mattered. She held his gaze, unflinching, her presence steady, because now she understood exactly where she stood. Not above the system, not outside it, but no longer beneath it either. She was part of its movement, and that made her unpredictable. You are drawing attention you cannot manage, he said, but the certainty that had been in his voice before was no longer absolute. It wavered, just slightly, but enough for Ava to feel it. She did not rush to answer. She let the silence stretch again, letting him sit in that space where his words no longer carried full control. Then, quietly, she spoke. You are not managing it anymore either. That was the moment. Ava saw it clearly. The shift was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it was real. His gaze tightened, his posture adjusting just enough to reveal that the balance had moved, not completely, not permanently, but enough that he could no longer operate from a position of absolute control. Ava's breath remained steady, her expression unchanged, but inside, the recognition settled fully. This was the first time she had seen him react, not as part of the system, as someone inside it. You were easier to predict before, he said after a pause, his voice lower now, more controlled again, but not as distant, not as detached, as if he was forcing himself back into that position. Ava's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something sharper, more certain. That was the point, she replied. Another silence followed, but this one was different. It was not tension waiting to resolve. It was tension that had shifted its center. Ava stepped back slightly, not retreating, but repositioning, her gaze still locked on his, her presence grounded in something that no longer needed validation. She did not need to prove anything in this moment. It was already happening. Around them, the system continued to move, but not as smoothly as before, not as predictably, and both of them could feel it. The flow had changed, and so had they. Ava turned slightly, her focus breaking from him just enough to signal that she no longer needed to hold the moment to maintain control. That alone was enough, because when she looked back at him, just for a second, she saw it clearly, not in his words, not in his posture, but in the smallest, most telling detail of all. For the first time since she had met him, he did not look completely certain. Ava did not move when the silence stretched again, but this time, it was not tension that filled the space between them. It was inevitability. She could feel it, not as a sudden realization, but as something that had been building beneath every moment, every pattern, every controlled narrative she had unraveled piece by piece. And now, it was all aligning. Her eyes held his, steady, unshaken, but deeper now, no longer searching, no longer testing. She already knew. It was never about humiliation, she said quietly, her voice calm, but carrying something heavier, something final. That was just the entry point. He did not interrupt. He did not correct her. And that silence confirmed everything. Ava took a slow breath, her chest rising, then falling, her mind moving through every detail she had gathered, every inconsistency, every pattern that once felt disconnected but now locked into place with undeniable clarity. You needed a trigger, she continued, her tone steady, but her eyes sharper now, reflecting something deeper than control, something closer to truth breaking through, something public, emotional, impossible to ignore. Her jaw tightened slightly as the memory surfaced again, not as pain this time, but as evidence. Ryan. The restaurant. The cameras. The timing. You needed me to react, she said, her voice lower now, more focused, because reaction creates data. The words settled into the space between them, heavy, undeniable. Ava felt it then, not just understanding, but the full weight of it pressing through her chest, through her breath, through everything she thought she had been experiencing. It was never just about her being hurt. It was about how she would respond to it. Her gaze did not break. The humiliation was designed, she said, each word clearer now, stronger. Not to destroy me, but to measure me. A pause. Her breath caught for just a second, not from weakness, but from the sheer magnitude of what she was saying, what she now understood. And everything after that, she continued, her voice gaining strength, rising just enough to carry the truth she could no longer hold back. The video, the suppression, the control, it was all part of the same system. Ava felt it all at once. The betrayal, not just from Ryan, from everything. From every moment she thought was real, every reaction she believed was hers alone, every piece of her life that had been quietly positioned without her knowing. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, her breath deeper now, heavier, because this was not just realization. This was exposure. You were never testing the situation, she said, her voice no longer just calm, but edged with something sharper, something breaking through the control she had built. You were testing me from the beginning. Her eyes did not leave his, not even for a second, because now she needed to see it, needed to see if he would deny it. He did not. Ava exhaled sharply, the sound breaking through the stillness, not loud, but filled with everything she had been holding back, everything that had been building since the moment that ring hit the table, since the moment her life had been turned into something she did not choose. You turned my life into a controlled environment, she said, her voice trembling just slightly, not from weakness, but from the intensity of the truth finally breaking free. And you watched to see if I would break or adapt. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything before. Ava felt the shift inside her, not subtle, not controlled, but raw, real, undeniable. The hurt, the anger, the realization that none of it had been random, none of it had been fair, none of it had been hers to control from the beginning. And yet, she had still found a way to fight. Her breath steadied slowly, her posture straightening, her expression changing, not softening, not breaking, but sharpening into something far more dangerous than anything she had been before. You chose me, she said quietly, her voice grounded now, no longer shaken, but resolved. You decided I was worth testing. A small pause. Then, stronger. Which means you also decided I was capable. That was the moment everything shifted. Ava felt it completely, not just in her mind, but in her entire body, like something had unlocked, something that had been held back by confusion, by doubt, by pain. And now it was gone, replaced by clarity, by purpose, by something that could not be undone. Her eyes held his, unflinching, unafraid, no longer searching for answers, because she already had them. You created this, she said, her voice steady, final. But you do not get to control what it becomes. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the weight of everything that had just been revealed, everything that had just been claimed. Ava felt the last piece fall into place inside her, the final shift from confusion to understanding, from reaction to intention. This was never just something that happened to her. It was something that was done to her. And that difference changed everything. Her shoulders settled, her breath even, her presence completely aligned with the truth she now carried. There was no hesitation left, no doubt, no question about what came next. Because now, it was no longer about proving anything. It was about balance. About taking back what had been taken from her in a way that could not be undone, could not be erased, could not be controlled by the same system that created the problem in the first place. Ava took a small step forward, her gaze unwavering, her voice quiet, but absolute. You wanted to see what I would become, she said, each word precise, grounded, inevitable. Now you will. And in that moment, there was no anger left in her expression, no visible emotion, just something far more dangerous. Certainty. Because what had been done to her was no longer something she needed to escape. It was something she was going to answer. And this time, the outcome would not be theirs to control. Ava did not speak again after that moment, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been set in motion. Words had done their job. Now, only outcomes mattered. She turned without hesitation, her steps calm, measured, but carrying a weight that had not been there before, not pressure, not fear, but certainty sharpened into purpose. The city around her had not changed, but everything within it felt different now, like layers she once moved through blindly had become visible, mapped, predictable in ways they had never been before. Ava walked with quiet precision, her mind no longer chasing possibilities, but organizing inevitabilities. Every piece was moving. Every player was shifting. And she could feel it, the subtle tension in the system tightening, like something preparing to either hold or collapse. Her phone vibrated once, then again, a steady rhythm now, no longer sporadic, no longer uncertain. Ava did not rush to check it. She let it continue, letting the pattern form before she responded, because reaction without awareness was how she had been controlled before. That would not happen again. When she finally looked, the notifications confirmed what she already knew. The narrative had fractured beyond repair. Threads she had seeded, threads she had redirected, threads she had never touched at all were now converging into something larger, something the system could not isolate without exposing its own structure. Public figures were hesitating. Verified accounts were contradicting each other. Silence was appearing where certainty had once existed. Ava's eyes moved across the screen, not with excitement, not with relief, but with calculation, because this was not victory. This was pressure building towards something that could not be contained much longer. She locked her phone again, her steps slowing slightly as she approached a familiar building. The same place where everything had started, where humiliation had been staged, where she had been positioned as something small, something disposable. Ava stopped across the street, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable, but inside, everything aligned with absolute clarity. This was not coincidence. This was convergence. One by one, the elements were returning to the same point. The system, the players, the narrative, all of it leading back here. Her breath slowed, her posture straightening as she stood there, not hidden, not exposed, but present, fully aware of the weight of this moment. This was where the outcome would be decided. Not by chance, not by reaction, by design. Ava reached into her coat pocket, pulling out both phones this time, holding them for a second, feeling the difference between them, one representing what had been done to her, the other representing what she had built in response. Then, calmly, she powered them both on. The screens lit up simultaneously, reconnecting her to the system at the exact moment it was beginning to strain under its own weight. Messages flooded in. Requests. Warnings. Invitations. Ava ignored them all. Instead, she opened a single draft. The one she had written earlier. The one she had not posted. Funny how some stories are pushed faster than they can actually happen. She stared at it for a moment, her reflection faint in the screen. Not the same person who had written those words. Not the same person who had been humiliated. Not the same person who had reacted without understanding. This version of her was deliberate. Ava lifted her gaze from the screen, looking across the street again, her eyes scanning the building, the windows, the movement inside, because she knew now that she was not the only one who had returned. He was there. She could feel it. Not as a presence behind her this time, but as something waiting, watching from the other side, aware that this moment had been building just as much for him as it had for her. Ava exhaled slowly, her thumb hovering over the screen, not hesitating, but timing. Because this was not just a message. This was a trigger, the final layer, the one that would force everything into the open. Around her, the city continued, unaware, moving, breathing, but beneath it, the system was tightening, every piece aligning, every player stepping into position whether they realized it or not. Ava's grip on the phone remained steady, her expression calm, her mind completely still now, because there was nothing left to calculate. Everything had already been set. This was execution. She glanced once more at the building, her eyes sharp, focused, not searching anymore, but confirming. This was it. No more adjustments. No more delays. No more space to step back. Ava pressed the screen. The post went live, and in that exact moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. The system reacted instantly, faster than before, sharper, more aggressive, as if it had been waiting for this exact move, as if it knew this was the point where everything would either stabilize or break completely. Ava lowered her phone slowly, her breath steady, her posture unmoving, but inside, the awareness settled fully into place. There was no turning back now. Not for her. Not for him. Not for any of them. Because what she had just done forced everything into the same moment, the same space, the same outcome. And as she stood there, still, composed, watching the building across the street, feeling the invisible pressure rise with every passing second. One truth became unmistakably clear. The countdown had already started, and whatever was about to happen next would decide everything. Ava crossed the street without hesitation, her steps steady, each movement measured against the rising tension she could feel pressing through the air, like something unseen tightening around the moment she had just triggered. The doors opened before she reached them, not automatically, but intentionally, and that alone told her everything she needed to know. They were expecting her. She stepped inside, her posture relaxed, her expression composed, but her awareness sharpened to its highest point, because this was no longer observation, no longer preparation. This was engagement. The room had not changed, not physically, but the atmosphere had. Conversations were quieter. Movements were more controlled. Eyes followed her, not openly, but just enough to register her presence as something that could not be ignored anymore. Ava did not look at them. She did not acknowledge the shift. She walked forward, directly, her focus fixed on the one place she knew mattered. He was already there, standing exactly where he had been before, but not the same. Ava stopped a few feet away, her gaze meeting his, steady, unflinching, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy, deliberate, not empty, but filled with everything that had led to this point. Ava let it sit. She did not rush to break it, because now, silence was not pressure for her. It was control. "You posted it," he said finally, his voice calm, but not as distant as before, the words carrying weight, not accusation, but acknowledgement. Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged, her voice even. "You knew I would." A pause. His eyes studied her, deeper this time, more focused, as if trying to measure something that no longer followed the same pattern he had expected. "You forced convergence," he continued, slower now, each word more deliberate. "Everything is collapsing into one point." Ava stepped slightly closer, just enough to shift the space between them again, not aggressively, but intentionally, because distance no longer gave her advantage. Presence did. "No," she corrected quietly, her gaze unwavering. "I removed your ability to separate it." The words landed clean, precise, and she saw it, the smallest shift in his expression, not visible to anyone else, but clear to her now. He felt that. He adjusted. That was the difference. He was no longer dictating the structure of this conversation. He was responding to it. "You think this gives you control," he said, his tone tightening slightly, not losing composure, but no longer completely fluid, like something beneath it had been disrupted. Ava did not respond immediately. She let the silence stretch again, letting his words sit without validation, without reaction, because she understood now that control was not in speaking. It was in choosing when not to. Then, softly she spoke. "I think this removes yours." Another pause. Longer this time. He did not interrupt. He did not counter immediately. Ava held his gaze, her breathing steady, her posture grounded, because this was where everything shifted, not in action, not in force, but in perception. "You built a system that depends on controlling how things are seen," she continued, her voice calm, but layered with something deeper, something undeniable, and now, everyone is looking at it from different angles at the same time. She took a small step to the side, breaking the straight line between them, not retreating, but changing perspective again, forcing him to adjust with her, to follow the movement instead of holding the position. "That is not instability," she added, her tone sharpening slightly. "That is exposure." He exhaled slowly, not visibly tense, but no longer completely still, his posture shifting just enough to reveal the pressure building beneath his control. "And what do you think happens next?" he asked, his voice lower now, more focused, but carrying something new, something closer to uncertainty than before. Ava did not hesitate this time. "You tell me," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "because this is the part where your system is supposed to recover." The words were not a challenge. They were a mirror, and for the first time, Ava saw it clearly. He did not have an immediate answer. Not a real one. Not one that restored his position completely. The silence that followed was different from every silence before. It was not controlled. It was not strategic. It was unresolved. Ava felt it settle into the space between them, not as tension she needed to break, but as something she could hold, something she could let exist without losing ground. You are not supposed to be here, he said finally, but the statement lacked the certainty it once carried. Ava's lips pressed together slightly, not in reaction, but in recognition of what that meant. She had crossed a line he could not easily redraw. And yet, she replied quietly, her voice steady, grounded, "Here I am." The room around them remained quiet, but the awareness had shifted completely now. It was no longer just attention. It was caution. Ava could feel it, not directed at her specifically, but at the space she occupied, at the disruption she represented. She did not need to look to confirm it. She already knew. She had changed the balance. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. Enough that he could no longer operate without accounting for her. Ava stepped back slightly, not retreating, but releasing the moment just enough to show that she did not need to dominate it to maintain control. That alone was enough to shift everything again. "This is not over," he said, his voice controlled, but carrying something beneath it now. Something tighter, something that had not been there before. Ava met his gaze one last time, her expression calm, her presence steady, but her words precise. "No," she agreed softly, "it is just starting." And as the silence closed around them once more, heavier than before, filled with everything that had not yet been said, everything that had not yet been revealed, one thing became unmistakably clear. This was no longer a controlled environment. This was a game in motion, and neither of them had shown their final move yet. Ava did not move when the silence settled again, but something inside her shifted with absolute clarity, like a line had been crossed that could not be undone. She no longer needed to read him. She no longer needed to measure the space. Because for the first time, she knew exactly where she stood. And more importantly, she knew exactly where he did not. "You are still trying to contain this," she said quietly, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that no longer asked for acknowledgement, only recognition. He did not respond immediately. That alone told her everything. Ava stepped closer, closing the space between them in a way she had never done before, not careful, not cautious, but intentional, controlled, like she was stepping into a position that had always been hers, but had only now become visible. "That is the mistake," she continued, her eyes locked on his, steady, unwavering. "You think this is still something you can manage." A pause. She let it breathe. Let the words settle. Then, softer, but sharper, "It is not." His gaze held hers, but there was tension there now, not hidden, not fully controlled, something subtle but undeniable, like the system behind him had lost its perfect alignment, and he was feeling it in real time. Ava could see it. She did not need confirmation. "You said I accelerated something," she went on, her tone measured, deliberate, each word placed with precision. But that was not the acceleration. She reached into her coat slowly, not abruptly, not as a threat, but as a statement, pulling out her phone, holding it between them for just a second before turning the screen toward him. The feed was no longer fragmented. It had evolved. Threads had merged. Patterns had aligned. The narrative was no longer just questioned. It was being reconstructed, without his system controlling the outcome. Ava watched his reaction, not his face, but the smallest shift in his eyes, the fraction of a second where recognition turned into something else, something closer to realization. "This is," she said quietly. He did not take the phone. He did not step closer. But he did not look away either. Ava lowered it slowly, slipping it back into her pocket, because the point had already landed. "You built a system that works when people stay separate," she continued, her voice steady, but rising just enough to carry the weight of what she was revealing. "Isolated reactions, controlled narratives, individual responses you can measure and correct." She took another step forward, not aggressive, but undeniable, forcing him to either hold his ground or acknowledge the shift. "But you never accounted for what happens when those reactions connect," she added, her tone tightening slightly, not emotional, but precise, like a blade finding its exact point. A long silence followed. He exhaled slowly, but it was not the same controlled breath as before. It carried weight, adjustment, pressure. "You are creating something you cannot predict," he said, but the certainty was gone now, replaced by something else, something closer to caution. Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression calm, but her eyes sharper than ever. "No," she replied, her voice quiet, but absolute. "I am creating something you cannot stop." That was it. The shift was no longer subtle. It was clear. He did not respond immediately. He did not counter. And for the first time since she had met him, he had nothing ready. Ava felt it settle into her completely, not as victory, not as relief, but as control, real control, not given, not allowed, but taken. She was no longer operating inside his system. She was forcing it to operate around her. You wanted to see how far I would go, she said, her voice softer now, but heavier, grounded in something that no longer needed to prove itself. This is how far. Her gaze did not break. Not for a second. Because this was not just about him anymore. This was about everything behind him. Everything that had watched. Everything that had measured. Everything that had decided she was a variable instead of a person. Ava took one final step closer. Close enough now that there was no space left to misinterpret the shift between them. No distance left to maintain the illusion of control. And now, she said quietly, each word landing with finality, you do not get to decide what happens next. He held her gaze, but something in it had changed completely. Not gone, not broken, but no longer absolute. Ava saw it. She felt it. And she understood exactly what it meant. The balance had moved. Not temporarily, not slightly, fundamentally. She stepped back slowly, not retreating, but releasing the moment on her terms, her posture relaxed, her presence steady, because she did not need to hold it anymore. It was already done. Around them, the room remained still, but the energy had shifted in a way no one could ignore, even if they did not understand it. Conversations did not resume. Movements did not return to normal. Everything hovered, suspended, like the space itself was adjusting to something new. Ava turned slightly, her gaze breaking from his, not because she was finished, but because she no longer needed to maintain eye contact to hold control. That alone said everything. And behind her, he did not speak. He did not move. He did not reassert anything. Because in that moment, there was nothing left he could say that would restore what had just been lost. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, final, and absolute, settling over the room like something that could not be undone, something that had already changed everything, even if no one had the words to acknowledge it yet. Ava did not turn back, because she did not need to. The shift behind her was already happening, not as a single moment, but as a series of fractures spreading through something that had once appeared seamless, controlled, untouchable. She stepped forward slowly, her pace steady, her breathing even, but her awareness expanded far beyond the room, beyond the building, into the system itself as it began to react to what could no longer be contained. Her phone vibrated again, but this time she did not reach for it immediately. She let the pattern continue, letting the pressure build, because now reaction belonged to the system, not to her. When she finally looked, the change was undeniable. Accounts that had once reinforced the same narrative were now contradicting each other openly. Statements were being retracted, rephrased, softened. Public figures who had once aligned perfectly were hesitating, distancing themselves, shifting tone in ways that could not be reversed without drawing even more attention. Ava's eyes moved calmly across the screen, not surprised, not rushed, but precise, tracking the collapse as it unfolded in real time. This was not destruction. This was exposure. And exposure did not need force to spread. It only needed space. She stepped outside, the air cooler now, the city still moving, but something beneath it had changed, like an invisible structure was loosening, piece by piece, unable to hold its own weight under the pressure of too many eyes, too many questions, too many inconsistencies. Ava paused at the edge of the sidewalk, her gaze lifting slightly, not searching, not scanning, but observing, because this was no longer about what she could do. It was about what had already been set into motion. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, when she unlocked it, the shift was clearer than before. A key account, one that had originally pushed the narrative with precision and authority, had gone silent. Not deleted, not removed. Silent. That was worse. Silence created doubt. Doubt created distance. And distance broke alignment. Ava's lips pressed together slightly, not in reaction, but in acknowledgement, because this was the first real break in the chain. One link weakening, forced the others to adjust. She scrolled further. Another account, less central, but still connected, had posted a clarification, subtle, careful, but enough to create conflict with the original version of events. Not denial, not admission, but inconsistency. Ava exhaled slowly, her chest rising, then falling, her mind mapping the pattern as it expanded, because now the system was no longer controlling the narrative. It was reacting to fractures it could not fully seal. Across the street, a group of people stood near the entrance, their voices low, their movements restrained, but their attention sharper, more focused, not on her directly, but on the tension that now existed in the space itself. Ava could feel it, the awareness, the uncertainty, the subtle shift in behavior when something once considered stable no longer felt that way. She did not look at them. She did not acknowledge them. Because this was not about being seen anymore. It was about being understood. And that was already happening. Her phone vibrated again, sharper this time, and when she looked down, the message came from the verified account that had reached out earlier. This time, it was not a request. It was a statement. We need to clarify things publicly. Ava stared at the words for a moment, her expression unreadable, but her thoughts precise, because this was the next phase. Not control. Containment through exposure. They were no longer trying to suppress the narrative. They were trying to reshape it before it reshaped them completely. Ava locked her phone again, slipping it into her pocket, her posture steady, her presence calm, because she understood exactly what this meant. They were adjusting, but they were doing it too late. The alignment had already broken. The system was no longer unified. And once that happened, it could not return to what it was. Ava began walking again, her steps unhurried, her gaze forward, but her awareness tracking the ripple effect spreading outward, through accounts, through conversations, through the subtle changes in behavior that signaled something deeper than confusion. This was loss of control. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute in its direction. Behind her, the building remained, but it no longer held the same weight. It was no longer the center of control. It was just another piece, adjusting to survive. Ava felt it settle into her completely, not as triumph, not as satisfaction, but as clarity. She had not broken the system. She had revealed it. And in doing so, she had forced it to collapse under its own design. Her steps slowed slightly as she reached the end of the block, her gaze lifting just enough to take in the space around her, the movement, the hesitation, the subtle tension that now existed where certainty once lived. And in that moment, one truth became undeniable, not as a realization, but as something already in motion, already irreversible. This was not the end. Not yet. Because even as the system unraveled, even as control slipped from the hands that once held it, there was still one final piece left unresolved. One final move that had not yet been made. One last point where everything would converge again. Not for control, not for observation, but for conclusion. Ava's breath steadied, her posture straightening as that awareness settled fully into place. Her presence grounded in something that no longer needed to adapt, no longer needed to react. She was no longer inside the system. She was standing at the edge of it. And there was only one step left to take. Ava stood still at the edge of the street, but the stillness was no longer hesitation, no longer calculation searching for direction. It was control fully realized, a calm so complete it no longer needed to prove itself. The city moved around her, cars passing, voices blending into distant noise, but none of it reached her the same way anymore. Everything felt smaller, manageable, because for the first time since that night, since the moment everything had been taken from her without her consent, she was no longer reacting to a world that had been shaped for her. She was shaping it. Her phone rested in her hand, the screen dim but alive, holding everything she had built, everything she had unraveled, everything she now controlled without needing to hold it tightly. Ava did not look down immediately. She did not rush. Because this moment was not about speed. It was about certainty. Her breathing was steady, her posture grounded, her gaze forward, but inside, there was a clarity that had replaced every fragment of doubt that once existed. She remembered it, not as pain anymore, but as contrast. The moment she had stood in that same space, exposed, humiliated, reduced to something small, something powerless, something the system had decided she would remain. The weight of every eye, the silence that followed, the feeling of being erased in real time. Ava closed her eyes for just a second, not to escape it, but to acknowledge it, because that version of her was still part of this moment. But she was no longer defined by it. Her eyes opened again, sharper now, focused, because everything that had happened since had led her here, not by accident, not by chance, but by choice. Every step, every decision, every time she chose not to break. She turned her phone on fully, the screen lighting up in her hand, and this time she looked. The system was still moving, still reacting, still trying to stabilize what had already begun to collapse. But it no longer felt overwhelming. It felt predictable. Accounts shifting tone again. Messages appearing, some urgent, some controlled, some attempting to pull her into conversations she had already moved beyond. They needed her now, not as a subject, as a variable they could not ignore. Ava's lips pressed together slightly, not in reaction, but in recognition of how far that shift had gone. She was no longer being watched. She was being accounted for. And that meant one thing. She had control over what came next. Her thumb hovered over the screen, not uncertain, not hesitant, but deliberate, because this was the final layer, the one that would not just expose the system, but define what replaced it. Ava lifted her gaze again, looking across the street, at the building, at the place where everything had begun, and she could feel it, not his presence directly, but the awareness that he was still there, still watching, still part of this moment whether he chose to act or not. But that no longer changed anything. He was no longer the center. He was part of the outcome. Ava exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, not from release, but from acceptance, because there was no tension left in her now, no fear, no doubt, no need to question what she was about to do. The system had tested her. It had broken her down. It had tried to define her. And she had rebuilt herself inside it, piece by piece, until she understood it better than it understood her. Her phone buzzed again, a new message, urgent, but she did not open it. She did not need to. Because whatever it said, it was already too late to change what was about to happen. Ava looked down at the screen one final time, her expression calm, her eyes steady, because this was not just a decision. This was a declaration. Not to them. To herself. She did not need to destroy the system completely. She did not need to erase every piece of it. She only needed to remove its ability to control the narrative of what had been done to her. And that would change everything. Ava's thumb moved, not quickly, not forcefully, but with absolute precision, opening a final draft she had prepared, not reactive, not emotional, but clear, undeniable, impossible to distort without revealing the truth behind it. A full timeline. Names. Sequences. Connections. Everything aligned. Everything structured. Everything undeniable. Not chaos. Not accusation. Truth. She read it once, not to check, not to doubt, but to confirm that it said exactly what it needed to say, nothing more, nothing less. Her breath slowed, her posture still, her presence grounded in something that no longer needed to prove itself to anyone. Around her, the city continued, unaware that in this quiet moment, something irreversible was about to be set into motion. Ava lifted her gaze one last time, not searching, not questioning, just acknowledging the space, the system, the people who had once controlled every variable of her life. And then, without hesitation, without fear, without looking back, she made her choice. Ava did not rush the moment. Her thumb rested against the screen, not trembling, not hesitant, but grounded in something far more deliberate than impulse. For a second that stretched longer than it should, she simply breathed, steady and controlled, because this was not about reaction anymore. This was about definition. Then she pressed send. The post went live without noise, without spectacle, just a quiet shift in the current that carried everything with it. The timeline appeared, structured, undeniable, each detail aligned with precision, not exaggerated, not emotional, but exact, supported by patterns the system itself had created and could no longer deny without exposing its own architecture. Ava lowered her phone slowly, her gaze lifting, her expression unchanged, because she already knew what would follow. It did not explode instantly. That was the difference between chaos and control. It spread, carefully at first, then with increasing clarity as the structure of the information made it impossible to dismiss as random noise. People did not react emotionally right away. They paused. They read. They compared. And that pause was everything. Ava watched it happen, not through the screen now, but through the shift in the environment around her, the subtle change in behavior, the way conversation slowed, the way attention sharpened, the way certainty began to dissolve into something far more dangerous for those who had controlled it. Understanding. Her phone vibrated again, but this time she looked immediately. The verified account had responded. Not defensively, not aggressively, carefully. A statement acknowledging inconsistencies, promising transparency, attempting to regain control through controlled admission. Ava read it once, her eyes calm, her mind already processing the implications. They were not denying it. They could not. They were adjusting. That meant the structure had already broken beyond repair. Ava locked her phone, slipping it back into her pocket, her posture steady, because this was where her role changed again. She did not need to push further. She did not need to amplify. The system was now reacting to her action, not the other way around. That was control. Across the street, movement inside the building had shifted. People were no longer still. They were moving faster, more purposefully, not in panic, but in response, like a structure trying to reorganize itself under pressure it could no longer ignore. Ava watched it without emotion, not detached, but focused, because she understood something now that she had not before. Justice was not destruction. It was exposure with consequence. Her phone buzzed again. A message this time. From him. Ava paused for a fraction of a second before opening it, not out of fear, but out of awareness of what this represented. The message was short. You made your move. Ava's lips pressed together slightly, not in reaction, but in acknowledgement. She did not respond immediately. She did not need to, because the move had already been made, and it was no longer his to answer. She locked the phone again, her gaze lifting, her breathing steady, because this was not a conversation anymore. This was outcome. Around her, the ripple effect was becoming visible in ways that could not be contained. A group of people nearby were no longer speaking quietly. Their voices carried more weight now, more urgency, not about her directly, but about what was unfolding, about the shift they could feel but had not yet fully understood. Ava remained still, grounded, her presence calm, because she was not part of the reaction. She was the cause of it, and she had already stepped beyond the point where reaction could change the outcome. The system would adjust. It would attempt to rebuild. It would try to contain the damage within acceptable limits. But it would never return to what it was, because now, the structure behind it had been seen. Ava exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, not from relief, but from completion, because this was not about winning. It was about restoring balance in a way that could not be reversed without cost. And the cost was already beginning to show. Her phone vibrated again, sharper this time, and when she checked it, the changes were clearer. Accounts were being questioned openly. Some were losing credibility in real time, their previous certainty now working against them. Others were distancing themselves quickly, trying to preserve their own position before the collapse reached them. Ava watched it unfold, her eyes steady, her mind clear, because this was the consequence phase. Not explosive, not dramatic, but irreversible. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, her gaze lifting once more, taking in the space around her, the movement, the tension, the subtle but undeniable shift in power that had taken place. She had not destroyed them. She had forced them to answer. And that was enough. But as she stood there, composed, grounded in the certainty of what she had done, one truth remained just as clear as everything else. Nothing ended without cost. And as the system adjusted, as people repositioned, as narratives fractured and reformed under pressure, the consequences were not isolated to those who had controlled it. They extended outward, touching everything connected to it, reshaping positions, relationships, and outcomes in ways that no one could fully predict. Ava felt it settle into her, not as doubt, not as regret, but as understanding, because this was the reality of power. Every action created a shift. Every shift created a price. And as the first visible cracks turned into lasting fractures, as the people who once controlled the narrative began to lose their footing in real time, one thing became undeniable. The system had been exposed. But now, everyone inside it would have to pay for what came next. Ava did not move right away after the final wave passed through the system, because there was no need to chase what had already settled. The urgency that once drove every decision, every breath, every step she took, had faded into something quieter, something steadier, something that no longer demanded action to prove its existence. The city around her had not stopped, not even for a second, but it felt different now, like the weight beneath it had shifted just enough to change how everything moved across its surface. Conversations resumed, but not the same way. People spoke with more caution, more awareness, like something invisible had been revealed and could not be unseen. Ava stood at the edge of the street, her posture relaxed, her shoulders no longer carrying the tension that had once defined her presence, because the fight was no longer active. It had already been decided. Her phone remained in her pocket, vibrating occasionally, but no longer demanding her attention. The system was still adjusting, still responding, still trying to stabilize itself under the pressure of what had been exposed, but Ava was no longer part of that reaction. She had stepped beyond it. When she finally pulled the phone out, her movements were slow, almost casual, her eyes scanning the updates not with urgency, but with quiet observation. Statements had been released. Clarifications had been issued. Names were being repositioned carefully, some stepping forward to take responsibility, others stepping back to avoid the fallout. The structure was not gone. It had simply changed. And that was the difference. Ava understood it now in a way she had not before. Power was never about destruction. It was about transformation. The system had not collapsed completely. It had adapted, reshaped by the truth it could no longer suppress, forced into a new form that could exist under scrutiny instead of behind control. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her gaze lifting slightly, taking in the world around her, not as something she needed to navigate carefully, but as something she now understood deeply. Across the street, the building still stood, unchanged in its physical form, but no longer carrying the same presence, the same invisible authority it once held over everything connected to it. People entered and exited, but their movements were different, less certain, more aware of the space they occupied within something larger. Ava watched it for a moment, not with satisfaction, not with resentment, but with clarity. It was no longer her battlefield. It was just a place. Her breathing remained steady, her posture grounded, because what had changed was not just the system. It was her relationship to it. She was no longer reacting to forces outside her control. She was choosing how to engage with a world that could no longer define her without consequence. Her phone buzzed once more, and this time, when she looked, the message was simple. From him. You changed the outcome. Ava stared at the words for a moment, her expression unreadable, but something inside her shifted, not as conflict, not as tension, but as acknowledgement. She typed slowly, her fingers steady, her mind clear. No, she replied, pausing for just a second before finishing the thought. I changed who gets to decide it. She sent the message and did not wait for a response. She did not need one, because whatever remained between them was no longer defined by control, by observation, or by power held over the other. It was defined by recognition. And that was enough. Ava slipped the phone away again, her steps finally moving forward, not towards something specific, not chasing another outcome, but simply moving because she could. The weight that had once followed her, shaped her, limited her, was gone, replaced by something lighter, something grounded, something real. She did not need to prove anything anymore. Not to the system. Not to him. Not even to herself. The path ahead was not clear. It did not need to be. Because for the first time, she was not walking into something designed for her. She was walking into something she could shape. The city continued around her, steady, alive, unchanged in its rhythm but altered in its meaning, and Ava moved through it without resistance. Without hesitation, her presence no longer defined by what had been done to her, but by what she had chosen to become in response. And as the noise of the world settled into something distant, something soft, something almost calm, one truth remained, quiet but certain, like the final echo after a storm has passed. Everything had changed. And yet, for the first time, everything felt still. Ava did not look back again, not because the past no longer existed, but because it no longer held any power over where she was going. The city stretched out in front of her, familiar yet different, not changed in structure, but transformed in meaning, like a place that had always been there, but had only now revealed its true shape. Her steps were steady, unhurried, grounded in something deeper than confidence, something quieter, more permanent. She was no longer moving to escape what had happened. She was moving with full awareness of what it had made her become. The woman who had stood in that room, exposed and humiliated, had believed power belonged to those who controlled the moment, those who shaped perception before anyone could question it, those who decided what was seen and what was hidden. But that version of her had not understood the cost of that illusion, had not seen the fragility beneath it, the way control could unravel the moment truth was allowed to exist without interference. Ava understood now, not as theory, not as something she had been told, but as something she had lived, step by step, decision by decision, through every moment where she could have broken, where she could have disappeared into the version of herself they had designed for her. She did not. And that was the difference that changed everything. Her phone remained silent now, not because the world had stopped reacting, but because it no longer needed her to guide it. The truth had been placed. The system had adjusted. The consequences had begun. What remained was not a battle. It was a new equilibrium. Ava paused briefly at a crosswalk, the signal counting down in bright red numbers, each second passing with quiet precision, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel it, not the weight of what had happened, but the absence of it. The pressure that had once filled every breath was gone. The urgency that had driven every thought had settled. In its place was clarity. She was not the same person who had entered that system, not just stronger, not just more aware, but fundamentally different in the way she saw the world, in the way she understood power, in the way she chose to engage with it. Power was not about control over others. It was about control over truth, over perception, over the narrative that defined reality, and more importantly, over herself. The light changed. Ava stepped forward with the crowd, blending into the movement, but not disappearing into it, her presence quiet, grounded, intentional. People passed her without recognition, without knowing what had shifted, what had been revealed, what had been redefined by her actions. And that was exactly how it should be. This was never about being seen. It was about ensuring that what had been done to her could not be done again. Not to her. Not to anyone who found themselves caught inside a system that thrived on silence and control. Ava's gaze lifted slightly as she reached the other side of the street, her expression calm, her eyes steady, reflecting not what she had lost, but what she had gained. Understanding. Agency. The ability to stand inside a system without being consumed by it. She did not need to tear it down completely. She had already done something more lasting. She had forced it to change. And in doing so, she had changed herself. The world continued around her, unchanged in its rhythm, but altered in its meaning, and Ava moved through it without resistance, without hesitation, her presence no longer shaped by fear or reaction, but by choice. She did not know exactly what came next. She did not need to, because for the first time, the future was not something waiting to happen to her. It was something she could shape, one decision at a time, with clarity, with intention, with a power that no longer depended on anyone else's approval. Ava walked forward, her steps steady, her breath even, her mind clear, and as the city stretched out in front of her, full of possibility, full of uncertainty, full of everything she now understood how to navigate, one truth remained, quiet but unshakable, like the final echo of everything she had endured and everything she had overcome. She had not just survived the system. She had rewritten the rules it lived by, and as she disappeared into the rhythm of the world, no longer a subject, no longer a variable, but something far more dangerous and far more free, one thought lingered, simple, sharp, impossible to ignore. They thought they were writing my story, until I became the author they could not control.